Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. It was around 10 years ago when I was 19. My best friend and I had always shared an interest in the paranormal. We were both into anything strange and unexplained, ghosts, UFOs, conspiracy theories, anything that gave us that thrill of the unknown. One evening, she bought a board called Psychic Circle. It wasn't a Ouija board, exactly, but it worked on similar principles. It had a set of words, symbols, and pictures on it, and there was a little booklet that came with it, explaining how to interpret the symbols and messages. We were eager to use it, thinking it'd be the perfect way to connect with the beyond, or whatever you want to call it. For the first few times, though, nothing happened. The board sat there, quiet and still, as we tried to summon spirits. We followed the instructions, closed our eyes, tried to clear our minds, but nothing moved. At first, we laughed it off, not really taking it seriously. After all, it's hard to get scared of something that just doesn't seem to work. But then one night, she took it over to her aunt's house. Her aunt had always been a bit odd, to say the least. I didn't know her that well, but I had the feeling that her energy was different from most people's. When she got back, she told me they'd had a really intense experience with it. Apparently, her aunt had gone all out, closing the windows, turning off the lights, and really focusing on it. According to her, the board had actually moved, spelling out words, and they'd asked questions that seemed to be answered. They both had freaked out, but her aunt seemed oddly calm, even a little smug about it. It was as though she'd been waiting for something like this to happen. My friend said her aunt asked her to leave the board at her place for a few days so she could keep using it on her own. Her aunt had said she wanted to further explore whatever had happened, though my friend didn't really know what that meant. A few days later, we made plans to visit her aunt that weekend to play with it again. I wasn't sure what to think about it all, but there was something in the back of my mind that told me I should be cautious. I'd had a few brushes with the supernatural in the past, and none of them had been good experiences. But despite the warnings my own gut was giving me, I agreed to go along with it. It was only a board game, after all. How scary could it really be? That Friday night, I got into my friend's car. The moment I sat down, a cold feeling washed over me, deep in my chest, like something wasn't right. I shook it off as nerves, but it kept gnawing at me. It wasn't the usual excitement you feel before something cool. It was dread, and it was intense. I glanced over at my friend, and she seemed oblivious, chatting away about the stuff we were going to do. She was excited to see her aunt again, and I didn't want to ruin her mood, so I kept quiet. But the feeling of unease followed me as we drove. When we arrived at her aunt's house, it only got worse. From the second I stepped out of the car and onto the gravel driveway, the air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. I was trying to ignore it, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid, but there was this heaviness in the atmosphere that I couldn't shake. As we walked to the door, I noticed her aunt standing in the doorway, but something about her seemed off. Her smile was tight, and when she looked at me, I could feel this strange hostility, though I didn't understand why. I tried to be friendly as we stepped inside, but it was clear she wasn't having it. The whole vibe of the house was different than what I remembered. It wasn't just the usual clutter or mustiness of an old home. It felt wrong. My skin tingled, and I could feel my heartbeat pick up, but I pushed it down and tried to act normal. She didn't offer us a drink, didn't offer us a seat. It was all very cold, almost like I wasn't welcome there. Then she brought out the board. The moment she put it on the table, something shifted in the room. It wasn't just the board itself, it was the way she handled it. She took it out of the box like it was something fragile, something to be revered, and I couldn't help but notice how old it looked. The board, once bright with colors and symbols, now looked weathered, like it had been exposed to the sun and rain for years. The colors had faded, the edges were frayed, and the surface looked worn, as though someone had been using it for a long time. I thought it was odd, but I didn't say anything. My friend asked her aunt what had happened to it, and her aunt's response sent a chill down my spine. "It's been sweating," she said, and then she didn't offer any more explanation. She just looked at the board, and then at me, and there was something about the way she said it that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The words didn't make any sense, but somehow they felt significant. I felt a rush of cold air. Even though no window was open, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We sat down at the table. Her aunt arranged the board and positioned the oracle, a small pointer device, on the center of it. She then looked at me, directly at me, and said in a low, steady voice, "You're going to want to leave your hands off it." I didn't understand what she meant at first. But then she added, "They don't want to talk to you. They don't like you." I didn't know if she was joking or being serious, but I could tell from the way her eyes narrowed at me that she wasn't playing around. Her tone was so firm, so certain, and it made me feel wrong. It was like she could see right through me, like she knew something I didn't. I tried to laugh it off, thinking she was just being weird, but my palms were already sweating. I tried to touch the board, but she sharply told me to pull my hand away. Her aunt's voice was tense, like there was something beneath the surface that I couldn't see. "Don't touch it," she said. "It won't answer you. Not tonight." At that point, I could hardly breathe. My chest felt tight, my palms clammy. The board lay there in front of us, and the energy in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that it was just the atmosphere, the creepy vibe, but it didn't help. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of strange dream where everything was off, where nothing made sense. We didn't stay much longer after that. My friend was visibly upset, and I could see the confusion and concern in her eyes. Her aunt refused to give her the board back, claiming she had to study it more, and we left soon after. On the way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that something had been triggered by that board, that energy in the house. My friend was upset as we drove away. She said that her aunt had been acting completely out of character, that she'd never seen her aunt act like that before. It wasn't just the way she'd spoken to me. It was the way she was obsessed with the board, like it had a hold on her. I could tell she wasn't just worried about the weirdness of the night. She was scared. I could hear the uncertainty in her voice as she tried to explain her aunt's behavior, but it didn't make sense. We had no answers, no explanation for what happened, and I think that uncertainty was what left both of us feeling unsettled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of the board and her aunt's strange, cold gaze kept flashing through my mind. I couldn't get it out of my head. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. I didn't want to mess with that board anymore. Whatever it was, whatever had happened in that house, it felt real, like we'd tapped into something we weren't supposed to. It wasn't a game, not anymore. A few weeks later, I bought my own version of the psychic circle, thinking maybe I could break whatever feeling had been hanging over me. But every time I tried to use it, it felt wrong. It didn't feel like it was for me, like I was meant to be messing with it. I never had any luck with it, and eventually, I just gave it to some other friends who were interested in it. I don't know what really happened that night at my friend's aunt's house. I don't know why her aunt reacted the way she did, or why the board had looked so weathered, like it had been used by someone else for years. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, we weren't supposed to mess with it. Maybe it was just a strange coincidence, or maybe it was something more. Either way, I don't think I'll ever know for sure, and I'm okay with that. Some things are better left alone. It had been almost 6 months since I'd moved into the house. I lived with 5 Navy guys. 4 of them were in active duty, and 1 had just gotten out. The house was huge, built sometime in the 70s, with creaky floors, wood-paneled walls in some places, and the kind of kitchen that still had a phone jack on the wall, even though no one used a landline anymore. It was old, but not in a charming way, just dated and worn, with the usual signs of too many guys living in one place. My room wasn't in the main house. It was in the garage, detached from the rest of the house by maybe 30 feet of concrete driveway. The garage had been converted sometime years ago into a guest room, probably for a teenager who wanted more privacy, or maybe an in-law situation. Now it was mine. It wasn't big, just enough space for a bed, a small dresser, and a nightstand. There was a tiny closet with a weird high window in it, and a narrow bathroom with barely enough space to turn around in the shower. I had a rug on the concrete floor to make it feel more like a room, but it still echoed slightly when I walked around barefoot. A metal door led outside, with a deadbolt and a knob lock, and a motion sensor light just above it that flicked on whenever someone, or something, got too close. It wasn't bad, really. I liked the privacy, and I liked that I could listen to music late at night, or just be alone when I wanted. It got cold in winter, warmer in summer, but I had a space heater and a box fan, and I made it work. Most nights it was quiet out there. The guys in the main house came and went, had friends over, sometimes stayed up late drinking or watching sports. But once I shut my door, it was like my own little world. That night started like any other. I had work the next morning, so I wasn't staying up late. I brushed my teeth in the little mirror above the sink, tied my hair back, and crawled into bed. My Labrador, Daisy, was already curled up at the foot of the bed, her usual spot. I always deadbolted the door now. At first, I hadn't been in the habit. The neighborhood felt safe. We were just outside a military base, and all our neighbors seemed either retired or just really quiet. But something, I don't even remember what, made me start locking it more carefully about a week before. I'd read some post online, or maybe heard a story on a podcast. Whatever it was, it stuck with me. That night, like every night that week, I turned the lock, tested it, turned off the lights, and got in bed. At some point during the night, I started hearing a noise. At first, it felt like part of a dream, loud, metallic, repetitive. In the dream, I think I was at a train station or maybe a factory. But the noise didn't stop when I began to wake up. It kept going. My eyes opened slowly, and everything around me was dark, except for a sliver of dim light coming from the window in the closet. The sound was real. I wasn't dreaming anymore. It took me a second to focus. My head was heavy, and for a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. Then I heard it again, loud rattling. Metal on metal. My heart jolted in my chest. I turned toward the door, just 3 feet from the end of my bed. The doorknob was shaking violently. Not just a little twist. Someone was shaking it with force, like they were trying to get in. It clattered and thumped, and every few seconds it paused, only to start again even harder. I froze. I didn't move a muscle. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't process what was happening. My first thought was that it had to be a dream. It had to be. But then I saw Daisy, my dog, my heavy sleeper, the one who never reacted to anything at night, was sitting up, staring at the door, ears forward, completely still. She wasn't growling. She wasn't barking. She was just alert, like she didn't understand what was happening either. That's when I knew it was real. I was wide awake now. The noise wasn't fading. It was growing more frantic. The rattling turned into banging. It sounded like someone was slamming their body against the door while twisting the handle, trying to force it open. I couldn't see them, but I didn't need to. I could feel it in my chest, the way the metal hit the frame, the way the knob snapped back and forth like it might break off. I had nothing to defend myself with. I looked around the room. There was a flashlight on the nightstand, one of those heavy-duty aluminum ones. I grabbed it, gripping it with both hands, trying to steady my breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't think clearly. My heart was racing so fast it hurt. Every muscle in my body felt locked up, like I'd forgotten how to move. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I didn't even get up. I just sat there, paralyzed, with the blanket pulled up to my chest, listening. The motion light outside had been triggered. I could see its glow through the closet window, bright and harsh, casting moving shadows across the top of the wall. Whoever was out there was big enough, or close enough to set it off. I waited to die. That sounds dramatic now, but that's what it felt like. I thought this is how it happens. I always wondered how I'd react in a situation like this. If I'd be brave, if I'd scream or run or fight back. I wasn't. I was just afraid. I sat there in silence, curled into myself, trying not to make a sound. After what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute, the noise stopped. Just like that. The rattling, the pounding, the shoving, all gone. The silence after it was deafening. My ears rang with it. Daisy stayed frozen, still staring at the door. I couldn't bring myself to move yet. I waited another minute. Then I crawled out of bed and slowly made my way to the closet. It wasn't much of a hiding place, but it felt like a safer spot. I pulled open the small closet door, climbed up onto the wooden bench under the high window, and peeked up just enough to see the top edge. I couldn't see anything moving. The light outside was still on, but there were no shadows now. I stared at the window until the light finally shut off. I stayed there, crouched and shaking, until my legs hurt. Eventually, I climbed down and sat back on the edge of the bed. I was trying to make sense of it, trying to be rational. I lived with 5 guys. It was 2:30 in the morning, bar closing time. They went out drinking a lot. It could have been someone drunk. Someone who thought they were at the right house, or maybe thought the garage was empty. Maybe they didn't mean any harm. I checked my phone. No messages. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I also didn't want to sit there all night afraid. So I sent a group text to the house. Asterisk, hey guys, are you up? Do you have people over? Someone was just outside my door, trying to get in. I assumed someone must be drunk or something. Ha. Kinda creepy, asterisk. I didn't want to sound panicked. I wanted it to sound casual, even though my hands were still shaking. I didn't expect much, but maybe someone would check. Maybe they'd know what happened. Less than 2 minutes later, I heard the back door to the main house swing open. Footsteps. Fast ones. I heard shouting, not words, just voices, and then whistling and banging. Doors opened and slammed shut. The backyard exploded with movement. I pressed my face to the closet window again. I could see the motion light flick on again. My roommates were outside, some of them in boxers, one of them with a baseball bat. They were running through the backyard, shining phone lights, checking behind the cars, the bushes, the sides of the garage. That was the first time I felt safe enough to unlock the door. I pulled it open, Daisy darting out ahead of me, and I ran barefoot across the driveway toward the house. I didn't even look around. I just ran straight inside. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. None of us did. My roommates spent the next few hours circling the property, watching through windows, walking along the sidewalk. They never found anyone. But they did find things. A pack of cigarettes on the back steps, a fast food bag dropped behind the garage half-eaten. Someone had definitely been there. The scariest part wasn't the noise. It wasn't even the idea that someone tried to get in. It was the fact that they never found them. No footprints we could follow, no clear trail. Just the signs that someone had been close, too close, and then vanished into the night. The next morning, I still hadn't slept. I sat at the kitchen table while the sun came up, drinking coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I replayed the sound of the doorknob shaking again and again in my head. I thought about what would have happened if I hadn't locked it. If I'd forgotten, like I had so many times before. It was just luck. Dumb luck that I'd started locking it a week before. Dumb luck that I was still alive. I didn't go back to the garage that day. Or the next day. I stayed in the main house, slept on the couch with Daisy, tried not to think about it. For weeks, I kept a baseball bat by my bed and checked every lock twice before going to sleep. I had the deadbolt replaced with a newer one. I added a door bar. I kept the flashlight in my hand every night as I lay down. Eventually, I did start sleeping out there again. Life kept moving. Nothing else happened. But I never slept the same way again. I never fully relaxed. Every night, I listened for that sound, metal on metal, someone trying to come in. And I knew deep down, whoever it was that night, they thought that garage was empty. They thought it was easy. And the only reason they didn't come through that door was because of one tiny decision I'd made a week earlier. That's what sticks with me. That feeling. Knowing how close it came to being so much worse. A few years ago, I was living with my sister for a while. She was going through a rough patch with her significant other, and they had been fighting constantly. Things had gotten so bad that they decided to take some time apart, and he was staying somewhere else for a while. She didn't want to be alone in that big house, and since I didn't have much going on, I didn't mind helping her out. Plus, she had decent internet, and that was a huge bonus for me. So, I ended up crashing on her couch for what I thought would be a few weeks at most. The house was pretty quiet. My sister was a little jumpy, understandably, and spent a lot of time pacing around, checking on things. The house wasn't in the best neighborhood, and she kept an eye on everything from the windows, which was kind of unsettling at times. But I wasn't going to complain. I got used to it. I'd sleep on the couch in the living room. It was a smallish room, not much to it. There was a window beside the couch I slept on, facing the street. The room was dark at night, but the street lights outside were bright enough that I could see most of the room, even in the middle of the night. There was another couch directly behind mine, against the wall by the front door. It was pretty much the only other piece of furniture in the room, aside from a couple of tables and some bookshelves along the walls. That night, I woke up suddenly, heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what had caused it, but I was suddenly wide awake, like I'd been jerked out of some horrible dream. I couldn't remember what the dream was about, but it felt so real, like I had been right in the middle of something, and then I was just pulled out of it. I sat up, breathing heavily, trying to shake off that lingering feeling of panic. The room was quiet, but I could hear the usual sounds, cars passing by outside, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the house settling. Everything seemed normal, but still there was something off. The darkness around me felt thicker than usual, heavier. I glanced around the room, trying to get my bearings, and that's when my eyes landed on the couch behind me. It was then that my stomach dropped. I could see something sitting there, in the dark, perfectly still. At first, I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the shadows warping into shapes, but as my eyes focused, I realized I was staring at a figure. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The figure on the couch wasn't a pile of clothes or a trick of the light. It was a person, or at least it looked like a person. A tall figure, cloaked in what looked like a long black robe, the hood pulled up over its head. The figure didn't move. It just sat there, unmoving, staring into the void, arms crossed in front of it. My first reaction was pure instinct. I thought, I need to protect my sister. Without thinking, I jumped up off the couch, adrenaline coursing through my veins, ready to rush the figure. I was ready to do whatever it took, but as I stood there, staring at this thing, something stopped me cold. I don't know if it was the sheer size of the figure, or the way it seemed to loom in the dark room, but I just couldn't move. The longer I stared, the clearer it became. The figure was taller than a normal person, maybe 6 feet 5 inches or taller. It was dressed entirely in black, the robe flowing around it in a way that didn't seem quite right, almost unnatural. The hood was pulled so low that I couldn't see any face, just the deep blackness inside. Its arms were crossed, one hand gripping the other elbow, the other hand folded tightly in front. It was just sitting there. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. A shiver ran down my spine. I had no idea what I was looking at, but I knew it wasn't right. I knew it wasn't supposed to be there. I could barely breathe, my mind racing to find an explanation. I didn't know what to do. In a panic, I bolted toward the next room, my mind scrambling to find something, anything, to defend myself with. I wasn't sure if I was trying to fight this thing or just protect myself, but I grabbed the first thing I could, an old basketball that had been left in the corner of the room. I stood there, clutching the basketball in my hands, trying to make sense of what was happening. I was wide awake at this point, fully aware of everything, but my brain just couldn't process it. The whole thing felt like some sort of nightmare, too real to be a dream, but too bizarre to be anything normal. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring back into the dark living room, expecting the figure to move at any second. It didn't. It just stayed there, motionless, as though it hadn't even noticed me. Finally, after what felt like forever, I snapped out of it. I started telling myself that it had to be a trick of the mind, some kind of illusion brought on by a bad dream or a glitch in my perception. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my chest, the tightness that wouldn't go away. I tried to calm myself down. I told myself it was just a pile of clothes, a trick of the shadows, and that I was overreacting. It had to be something simple, right? I gathered what little courage I had left and made my way back into the living room, my heart still racing. I flicked on the light, half expecting the figure to still be there, waiting in the darkness. But when the light flickered on, the room looked exactly as it had before. There was nothing on the couch, no figure, no dark-robed person, just the empty space where it had been sitting. I stared at the spot where the figure had been, trying to make sense of what I had seen. But there was nothing. No pile of clothes, no shadow, nothing. The couch was empty, completely normal, just as it had been before. I stood there in disbelief for a moment, trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. Had I imagined it? Had my mind just snapped after waking up from that weird dream? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I went back to the couch and laid down, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted to go back to sleep and pretend it hadn't happened. But it did happen. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. And no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, I couldn't shake the memory of that tall, dark figure sitting silently in the room. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, made me jump. Every time I looked toward the couch, I half expected to see that dark figure there again, watching me. The next morning, I didn't say anything to my sister. She was still asleep when I woke up, and I didn't want to freak her out. I tried to push the memory out of my head, but it lingered. It kept me up the next night, and the next. A couple of weeks later, my sister's boyfriend moved back in, and everything seemed to return to normal. The weird thing, though, was that every time I walked through the living room, I couldn't help but glance at that couch, just to make sure nothing was sitting there. I never told anyone what happened that night. I didn't need to. I didn't want to sound crazy. I just went on with my life, hoping I wouldn't see that thing again. But I knew deep down that I couldn't forget it. That dark figure, sitting so still and silent, was something I would never be able to explain. And maybe that was the scariest part of all. About 5 years ago, my mom started dating a man she met on a dating site. She was in her early 50s at the time, and though she had dated casually since her divorce, this was the first guy she seemed to get serious about. I didn't think much of it at first. I had met my own partner online around that same time, and by then, we were already living together. I was happy for my mom in that distant, slightly hesitant way you can be when you're not quite sure if it's real happiness or just distraction. The first time we met him, my wife and I both got the same weird feeling, though we didn't talk about it until later that night. He wasn't outwardly rude or aggressive. In fact, he barely said anything at all. He was polite, if you could call it that, just quiet, like he was half listening to everything and only ever processing some private thought in his head. He always seemed to have his eyes either mostly closed or squinted, like someone caught in a daydream or a migraine. And he was strange in small, quiet ways, which always seems worse than someone who's loud or obnoxious. He did things that made us uncomfortable, but that you couldn't exactly call out without sounding uptight. Once, he offered my wife a piece of chocolate while we were visiting. She politely declined, so he took one himself, slowly unwrapped it, put it in his mouth, closed his eyes, and let out this long, soft moan like he was doing something far more intimate than just eating a piece of candy. My wife shot me a look, but neither of us said anything. It felt awkward even acknowledging it, like saying something would somehow make it more real. That was just how things were when he was around, quiet, awkward, and slightly off. Another time, we visited my mom's house, and she ended up getting called into work. She told us to make ourselves comfortable and said she wouldn't be gone long. Her boyfriend was there too, but instead of hanging out with us or even staying in the living room, he went straight into my mom's bedroom and closed the door. He stayed in there for hours while my wife and I sat on the couch in the living room, watching TV and occasionally whispering to each other about how weird the whole thing was. He never came out. Not once. Not even for a glass of water. We kept glancing down the hallway, half expecting the door to creak open and him to suddenly be standing there, watching us without saying a word. I didn't want to overstep or make a big deal of it to my mom. She had a rough go of things after the divorce, and even though she seemed to be managing just fine now, I didn't want to be the one to cast shadows on something that might have been making her happy. But there was always something that didn't sit right with us. Things started unraveling between them just before Christmas that year. My wife and I had gone to visit her for the holidays, planning to stay the night, and then go to my dad's place the next morning. My mom seemed distracted the whole time we were there. She wasn't her usual cheerful self, and she kept bringing up little grievances about her boyfriend. Not big things, just frustrations that had clearly been building over time. We sat with her late into the night, listening to everything she had to say. My wife was especially supportive, nodding along, offering advice, and suggesting gently that maybe the relationship wasn't healthy. I agreed. I told her she deserved someone who made her feel safe and cared for, not someone who made her second-guess herself. But it became clear that she'd already made up her mind. She was planning to break up with him, and she had decided that Christmas Eve was the day she was going to do it. It felt a little dramatic, but also kind of fitting. Something about the symbolism of starting fresh, ending a bad chapter before a new year. We didn't press her on it. We just told her we'd support her no matter what. We spent that night at her place, slept in the guest room, and woke up early on Christmas morning. The snow had started falling while we slept, and by the time we were ready to head to my dad's place, it had really started to come down. It was a short drive, maybe an hour, but the roads were slick and icy by the time we got there. What we expected to be a quick visit turned into an unexpected overnight stay. The storm intensified, and it was clear we weren't going anywhere until the snow let up. My dad had a generator, plenty of food, and a fireplace, so we made the best of it. It was actually kind of nice. Cozy, quiet, and low stress. The next morning, the snow finally stopped, and we left as soon as the roads were drivable. On the way back, my wife turned to me in the car and said she had a bad feeling. She didn't say much more than that. Just that something didn't sit right with her. She was worried about my mom. The breakup, the snow, the guy being weird. It all swirled together in her head, and she just had a gut feeling. I told her we could swing by my mom's place on the way home. It wasn't far off our route anyway. When we pulled up, my mom's car was still in the driveway. That didn't mean much. She walked to work often, and she had probably had a few days off for the holidays. But seeing the car there made me pause. Her house was quiet, the blinds were drawn, and there weren't any signs of life. My wife squeezed my hand as we got out of the car. She looked tense, like she was bracing for something bad. We knocked on the door, then waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I tried the knob, knowing full well what I'd find. Sure enough, it was unlocked. My mom never locked her door. It always drove me crazy. She insisted that she lived in a safe neighborhood and that nobody ever bothered anyone around there. We stepped inside, and the house was dead quiet. No TV, no music, no lights. Just cold, stale air and the faint smell of something sour, maybe from the trash. I called out for my mom, but there was no answer. My wife stood close behind me, not saying anything, just holding onto my coat. I moved further into the house, heart beginning to pound. The living room looked normal. So did the dining room. Then we stepped into the kitchen, and I froze. There was a dark red puddle spreading slowly across the tile floor, glistening under the morning light coming through the kitchen window. It took me a moment to register what I was looking at. The source of it was the fridge. Specifically, the water dispenser on the freezer door. Blood was oozing out of it. It had filled the spill tray and was now leaking down onto the floor, forming a pool. My wife let out a sharp, terrified sound behind me. I stared at the fridge, absolutely certain that I was about to find my mom's head inside. Every story, every worst-case scenario I'd ever heard came rushing into my mind all at once. I imagined her boyfriend snapping after the breakup, killing her, hiding the body. I felt dizzy. The room tilted. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to step forward. I reached out, slowly, and opened the freezer door. Inside, right up against the ice dispenser, was a large plastic bag that had clearly been torn open. Dark red juice stained the inside of the freezer and coated the ice tray. It took me a second, maybe longer, to recognize what it was. Frozen cherries. The bag must have fallen over, wedged itself against the ice chute, and slowly melted from the warmth leaking in through the door seal. The juice had made its way down the chute, through the dispenser, into the spilled tray, and then onto the floor. I stood there, frozen, heart still thudding in my chest as the wave of realization crashed over me. I felt lightheaded, embarrassed, relieved, and exhausted all at once. I slumped against the counter, letting out a long breath. My wife was behind me, still pale, still holding her hands over her mouth. We looked around the rest of the house to be sure. My mom wasn't home. Her bedroom was empty, neat, untouched. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no chaos. Just quiet, like she'd left early and hadn't come back yet. We called her cell. No answer. We called again, and finally she picked up. She was at work. Everything was fine. She sounded tired, but okay. She decided to go in for a few extra hours to get out of the house. She said the breakup had been weird, and that she just wanted to keep busy. We didn't tell her what we'd seen, at least not right away. Later, when we could laugh about it, we explained what had happened. She thought it was hilarious. She said she'd been wondering what happened to that bag of cherries. Looking back now, it's kind of a funny story. But at the time, standing in that quiet kitchen, with the smell of thawed cherry juice in the air and that red puddle glistening on the floor, I genuinely believed something terrible had happened. My mind went straight to the worst place. And the thing that still unsettles me, even now, is how easily it could have gone differently. Her ex never tried to hurt her, never came back, never made a scene. He just left, and that was it. But the whole thing stayed with me. The quiet tension, the little signs that something was off. The way your brain fills in the blanks when you don't have all the facts. It's like your own thoughts betray you. And that's the part one still think about sometimes. Not the cherries, not the freezer, not the moment of relief. But the part where my mind believed, with absolute certainty, that I was walking into a horror scene. That part felt real. Too real. Because deep down, I think we all carry that fear with us. That little voice that whispers, something isn't right. That gut instinct you ignore because you don't want to make a fuss. And maybe sometimes it really is nothing. But sometimes it's not. It had been 2 years since my ex and I went through that awful breakup, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Still, it wasn't something I could easily forget. The memories came in waves. Sometimes, it would just hit me out of nowhere, like a gust of wind knocking the breath out of me. I'd remember the way she would twist everything I said, how she'd yell at me for the smallest things, and the lies that kept piling up like bricks, making the foundation of our relationship crumble. I remember the first time I realized something was really wrong. It was after the first big fight, the one that made me wonder if I could even trust her. I don't even remember what started it. It doesn't really matter now. But I do remember her eyes, the way they seemed to go blank when I questioned her. That was the first time I noticed something was off. But then there were the good moments, too. Moments where she would hold me, telling me how much she loved me, how we were perfect for each other. I wanted to believe it. I really did. But as the weeks passed, the good moments started to fade, and the bad ones started to take over. She'd get angry over nothing, and I'd walk on eggshells, trying to make her happy, trying to fix everything, but nothing ever worked. The breakup itself was a mess. She was the one who dumped me, over and over again, and each time, I'd beg her to reconsider, because I didn't know how to let go. But after a while, it became clear that it wasn't me she was angry with. It was something else, something that had nothing to do with me. And that's when I finally made up my mind. The last time she dumped me, I told her it was over. I told her she had to go. I told her I couldn't do it anymore. She didn't take it well. She wasn't ready to let go. I wasn't sure what she wanted. Maybe she wanted to hurt me. Maybe she just wanted control. But the words she said, they were like daggers. She called me every name under the sun, said I was worthless, that I'd never find someone else who'd love me, that I was a failure, and on and on. It hurt, sure, but I had made my decision. I was done. It was time for her to go. I tried to move on, and about 3 weeks later, I found someone new. Someone kind, someone who made me feel like I mattered. It was a fresh start, but it didn't sit well with her. I could feel the anger radiating off her, even from a distance. She didn't want me anymore, but she sure as hell didn't want anyone else to have me either. Then one day, out of the blue, she showed up at my door. She said she needed to pick up some things she had left at my place. I was reluctant to let her in, but I didn't know how to say no. I still had a soft spot for her, even after everything. So, I let her in, and we sat down on the bed. She handed me a piece of paper. I remember the look on her face as she told me to read it aloud. She wanted me to read it, word for word, to make sure I understood how she felt. I could already feel the tension in the room. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction, but she wouldn't leave until I did. So I took the paper and I read it. It was a brutal letter. She called me every terrible thing you could think of, selfish, heartless, incapable of love. She said I was a horrible person who didn't deserve to be loved, that I was a waste of space, that the world would be better off without me. My stomach turned as I read each word, but I didn't stop. I just kept reading, hoping it would end. When I finished, I looked up at her, and I could see the anger in her eyes. But then something shifted. She reached into her purse, and that's when I saw the gun. I froze. I didn't know what to say. My mind went blank, and all I could do was stare at it. It was real. It was loaded, and she was holding it like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Her hands trembled as she stared at the gun, like she was trying to convince herself to do it. For the next 15 minutes, she just sat there, the gun in her hand, the room heavy with silence. Every now and then, she would talk about how she knew what would happen if she pulled the trigger. She talked about the law, about going to prison, but none of it mattered to her. All that mattered was that I wouldn't be around anymore. I wouldn't be a problem. I wouldn't be someone she had to hate. I don't know how I stayed calm. I really don't. I could feel the sweat building on the back of my neck, my chest tightening with every breath. I wanted to scream, to beg her to stop, to run out of that room and never look back. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I tried to talk to her. I tried to reason with her, telling her that she wasn't a killer, that she didn't want this, that she needed to live her life, to move on, to find happiness without me. I could barely hold it together, my voice shaking as I spoke. But I kept going. I couldn't let her do this. I couldn't let her destroy herself, no matter how much she hated me. For what felt like an eternity, she just stared at the gun, her finger hovering over the trigger. I could hear her breathing, shallow and quick. It felt like time had stopped, like the whole world had gone quiet. I just kept talking, repeating the same words over and over, begging her to let it go, to put the gun down, to walk away. And then, finally, something changed. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. The gun lowered a bit, and she just sat there, her eyes red from crying, her hands still trembling. It wasn't over, not yet, but there was a shift. She wasn't going to pull the trigger. Not today. Not while I was still breathing. It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a triumphant moment where everything was okay again. But it was enough. Enough for her to put the gun down, enough for us to part ways, to say goodbye in the only way we could, without words, without hatred. She left after that. I don't remember if we hugged or not. My mind was too foggy to make sense of it. But she was gone, and I was still here. Alive. A couple of months after that, I found out she got engaged to someone else. It was like a punch in the gut, but at the same time, it wasn't. I was happy for her, in a way. It wasn't my life anymore, and I wasn't part of it. Maybe she had found someone who could handle everything she was carrying. Maybe she had finally found her peace. As for me, I moved on too. Slowly at first, but then with more confidence. I found someone who made me feel safe, who made me feel whole again. I started living my life the way I should have been all along. The scars from that time still linger, but they don't control me anymore. They're just reminders of a past I survived. And that's enough. We never spoke again after that day. I think we both knew it was for the best. I was about 8 or 9 when we moved into that house. It was a small, tucked-away place on a cul-de-sac in a quiet neighborhood. There was a lot of greenery around, trees and bushes that seemed to close in on the house. But what stood out to me the most, especially as a kid, was the huge backyard. It stretched out far behind the house, but one particular corner always gave me the creeps. There was a rusted-out trailer back there, the kind you tow dirt bikes on, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it felt like the trailer had some kind of bad energy around it. It wasn't even like I could explain it as a fear of rust, or something like that. It just felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to be there. It was just part of the backyard, but it felt like it was constantly watching us, like something was hidden inside, waiting. I wasn't the only one who thought this either. Our dog refused to go anywhere near that corner. If we took him outside to play, he'd veer away from that area and stand by the other side of the yard, staring at it. He'd whimper if anyone tried to take him closer. As time went on, that weird feeling about the trailer spread throughout the house. My 2 younger sisters, who shared a room, started acting strange at night. They'd come into my room at random times, saying they'd seen weird lights in their room. It wasn't the kind of thing where they were scared of the dark or anything like that. No, it was different. They'd say it was lights, but not like regular light, something strange. My parents just brushed it off, figuring it was the street lights outside. But every time they came into my room, I could see the unease in their eyes. One night, I woke up with a deep feeling of anger, a strange kind of anger, the kind you can almost feel in the air, like someone nearby was about to lash out at you. The kind that gives you a pit in your stomach. At first, I wasn't sure if I was still dreaming or if I had just woken up, but as my eyes focused in the dark, I saw it. A shape, standing in the doorway of my room. It was tall like a person, but there was something off about it. And then, I noticed the small red light near the shape's head. It looked like the cherry of a cigarette. Both my parents smoked, so I thought it might have been one of them, standing there, maybe getting a late-night smoke. "Mom? Dad?" I whispered, but there was no response. Not even a sound of a breath. The shape didn't move, and the red light just stayed there, glowing faintly in the darkness. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. Gone. I froze. My heart was racing. The anger I had felt moments ago turned into something else, pure fear. I pulled the covers over my head as fast as I could, trying to hide, trying to shut out whatever was in my room. My body was stiff with terror, but I had to stay still, like if I moved even a little, whatever it was would notice me and come closer. Then, there was a tug on the blankets. At first, it was gentle, almost like a breeze. But then it pulled harder, and I felt it again, another tug. This time, I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but I couldn't move. I held the blankets as tight as I could, refusing to let go. The tugging stopped, but the air around me felt thick with fear. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, just frozen, not daring to look. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I fell back asleep. When morning came, I hesitated before asking my parents about it. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I needed answers. But when I asked them, They both just said they had slept through the night and hadn't been anywhere near my room. They brushed it off as a bad dream, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The weirdness didn't end there, though. As the years went on, I started having strange dreams about that house. Dreams that were vivid and terrifying. I'd find myself in the house, but everything felt different. The walls were darker, the hallways longer. I'd be running through the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The worst part was the garage turned in. It was a one-story house, but in my dreams, there were stairs that led down to this black hole in the den. Every time I got close to it, something would pull at me, as if the darkness itself was alive. It was evil, undeniably so. I knew if I went too close, something horrible would happen. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape it. I'd always wake up before it could grab me, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. What made it worse was that my younger sister started having the same dreams. We'd never talked about it, not once, but when we were talking about the house with our mom one night, she described the same thing, running through the house, feeling like something was watching her, and that black hole in the den. She even described a man in the den, standing by the hole, just waiting. Our mom was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke again, her voice was shaky. She told us that she'd had similar dreams too, but we didn't say anything because we didn't want to worry each other. It was too eerie to even consider. We all agreed, without saying it aloud, that something about that house wasn't right. I've been back to that house a few times over the years, just to see it again, to walk by the old neighborhood, but every time I go near it, that same unsettling feeling comes back. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The neighborhood seems quieter, almost too quiet. The house looks the same, but there's something off about it now. The yard's a bit more overgrown, the trailer's still there, rusting away in the same corner where it had always been. But now, it seems even more out of place, like it doesn't belong. The feeling I had as a kid, the one that made my stomach drop whenever I thought about that trailer, is still there. It still feels like something's hidden in that corner, something that shouldn't be. I don't know if it was just a coincidence that all of us had similar nightmares, or if something in that house was messing with us. But there's no denying that the place had a strange hold on us. I've tried to reason it away, tell myself it was just childhood imagination or some weird coincidence that we all had similar dreams. But every time I pass by that cul-de-sac, the same creepy feeling comes back. Maybe it was something to do with the land, or maybe it was just the house itself. I don't know. All I know for sure is that I'll never forget the way that house made me feel. Every time I look at it, I can't shake the feeling that something is still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next person to get too close. I was sitting in my room after work, like I usually did. I'd just gotten back maybe 30 minutes before, and I hadn't even changed out of my work clothes yet. I was tired. Not the kind of tired that knocks you flat, but the dull, dragging kind that settles into your shoulders and makes your eyes sting. My boots were still laced up, and I was slouched sideways on my bed, scrolling on my phone with my legs hanging off the side. The sun was already going down, casting that soft orangey light across my room that made everything feel calm and quiet. It was peaceful, and honestly, I didn't feel like doing anything at all. My little brother was downstairs, watching TV like he usually did around that time. He gets home earlier than me, and by then he's already got snacks out and some show or YouTube video running loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. It was kind of comforting in a way, just hearing the muffled sound of his laughter now and then, the kind of normal background noise you don't think about until it's gone. Our dog Luna, a medium-sized shepherd mix, was passed out in the hallway right outside my bedroom door. She always did that. Never wanted to be too far from anyone, especially not me. If I was home, she was parked somewhere near me. I could see her from where I was lying, curled up on the old beige carpet, her paws twitching a bit every now and then like she was dreaming. It was just a normal evening, one of those evenings that blends in with all the rest. I remember hearing the neighbor's car start outside, some birds chirping out by the tree near our driveway, and Luna softly breathing in her sleep. Nothing strange, nothing weird. Just another day almost over. Then, without warning, Luna started freaking out. It wasn't just a bark. She jumped up like someone had kicked her. Her nails scrambled against the hardwood floor as she spun around and started barking like mad. Not the playful kind of bark she did when she wanted to go outside or saw a squirrel. This was full-on guard dog mode, loud, sharp, deep from the chest. She was growling too, mixed with a kind of confused whine, and every few seconds she'd let out this high-pitched howl like she was scared and angry at the same time. I shot up fast, heart already starting to thump a little harder. I hadn't heard anything, but she clearly had. I swung my feet off the bed and started to get up when I heard it. A man's voice, right outside my room, on the other side of the closed door. "Ah, that's a good girl." Just like that. Calm. Like someone talking to their own dog. Not loud, but clear. And it didn't sound like my brother. I know his voice, and this wasn't it. It was deeper, older. Kind of familiar in a weird way, but I couldn't place it in that second. My brain was still trying to catch up. I thought maybe it was our roommate. He's my dad's friend. Stays with us sometimes for work. Real chill guy. Comes and goes a lot. I figured maybe he'd come home early and surprised Luna, and she didn't recognize him at first. So I said without thinking as I walked to the door, "Oh, you're home early." I opened the door expecting to see someone standing there, but the hallway was empty. No roommate, no dad, no one. Just Luna, tail wagging now, standing perfectly still and staring toward the end of the hallway like someone was there. Her ears were perked, her head tilted a little, and she kept making these low, excited woofs like she does when she's trying to be friendly with someone new. But there was nobody. The hall was quiet. Just the same beige carpet and old photos on the walls, and that weird little scuff mark we never painted over near the stairs. I stepped out, looking both ways, trying to hear footsteps, or maybe the front door closing, anything that would explain what the hell just happened. But there was nothing. No sound at all except the low hum from the TV downstairs and Luna's occasional tail thumping against the floor. Then my brother stomped up the stairs and came around the corner looking irritated. "Dude, what the hell?" he said, looking at Luna, then me. "Why'd you get her all worked up?" I told him I didn't. That I thought it was our roommate coming home early. That I heard someone say, "Good girl," clear as day. My brother's face shifted immediately. Not scared, but definitely off. He got this confused, unsettled look and said he heard the same voice. He thought it was me or the roommate too. At that point, we just stared at each other. Luna still wouldn't leave the spot she was in, still wagging her tail at nothing. We both got quiet for a second, like we were trying to feel out the air around us. Something didn't sit right. Not like a jump scare or anything, but this weird weight in the chest, like something wasn't lining up the way it should. So we grabbed our things. I had my butterfly knife in the drawer, more for show than anything, but it was sharp enough to hurt someone if it came to that. My brother went and grabbed his BB gun. Looked ridiculous, but it made him feel better. We checked every room in the house. Every closet, every corner. Even the garage and the crawl space. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No open windows. No shoes at the door that didn't belong. All the doors were locked. Even the back one we sometimes forget. The roommate wasn't home. I called him just to be sure. He was still out of town, working late. Nobody else had keys. Nobody we knew, at least. The thing is, the voice wasn't muffled. It wasn't something that could have traveled from outside or from a TV. It was right there, like someone standing just inches from the door. I remember the tone of it, soft but confident, like whoever it was had done it 100 times before. That calm way people talk to a dog they know and like. After checking the house twice and finding nothing, we tried to go back to normal, but it didn't feel normal anymore. My brother went back downstairs and muted the TV. I went back to my room, but I left the door open this time. Luna eventually laid back down, but her head kept lifting every few minutes like she was hearing things we weren't. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my head, over and over. That voice, those exact words. The timing of it, how Luna reacted before it happened, like she was already sensing someone there. And then after, how she acted like she could still see them. The thing that really sticks with me is that we both heard it. Not just me, not something I imagined. And we both thought it was someone we knew. The fact that we matched that up without even talking about it first, that's what messes with me the most. I tried to make sense of it afterward. Thought maybe someone had snuck in and out. But our house isn't like that. The hallway leads to a dead end. There's no back stairs or extra exits. You come in through the front or the back, and we'd checked both. You can't get out without someone noticing. We even checked with the neighbors the next day. Asked if anyone had been around the house, or if anyone saw someone come or go. Nothing. Everyone said it was a quiet night. I kept thinking maybe it was a sound from the TV downstairs, but when we checked what my brother had been watching, there was nothing in it that matched. No male voice talking to a dog. And even if there had been, the volume wasn't loud enough for it to be that clear from upstairs. I'd know. I can hear when he's blasting stuff. Eventually, days passed and nothing else weird happened. Luna went back to being her usual self. My brother moved on faster than I did. I guess that's just how it is. But I never forgot it. Every time I walked down that hallway, I glance at the spot where she was staring. I don't mean to. It just happens. I don't think someone broke in. I don't think it was a dream or a trick of the mind either. It was real. It happened. And it was just off. It didn't feel supernatural. It didn't feel like some ghost or spirit or whatever. It felt human. Too human. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Someone we didn't invite, who didn't belong. And that's what scares me more than anything. That someone could have been that close to me, to my door, and we never saw them. That they spoke like they'd been here before. Like they knew the dog. Like they were part of our house, part of our routine. But they weren't. We never figured out who it was. Never got an answer. And maybe that's what keeps it alive in my head, all this time later. Because when something truly strange happens, and there's no way to explain it, no way to file it away neatly, it just sits there. And every now and then, when I'm lying in bed at night, I think about how close that voice was. How casual. How it said those words like it had said them 100 times before. And I wonder how many times it did, when we weren't home. I woke up in my girlfriend's room that morning, the sunlight barely breaking through the curtains. My head felt like it was in a vice, pounding with every breath. It wasn't the first time I'd stayed over at her place, but today, I definitely wasn't feeling my best. The night before had been a blur of beers, shots, and way too much laughter. I could feel the remnants of the hangover creeping in, the kind that made your body ache, your mouth dry, and your stomach twist in knots. I rolled over, my body still heavy from the alcohol, and glanced at the clock. It was around 10 a.m. I knew my girlfriend and her roommates would be at class, so it was just me and the dogs, her little Pomeranian and her cousin's Chihuahua. They were usually chill, running around, occasionally barking, but nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't planning on doing much that morning except laying there, nursing my headache, and trying to sleep off the hangover. But then something changed. I heard it, a high-pitched yelping, the kind of frantic barking that made you realize something was wrong. It wasn't the usual playful bark that the dogs would give when they saw someone outside, or when they were just excited. No, this was panic. Sharp, high-pitched, and desperate. I squinted in the direction of the noise, trying to figure out if I was still half asleep. But no, the yelps were coming from the hallway outside the bedroom door. I knew immediately it wasn't normal. The dogs never acted like that unless something was seriously off. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the cold wood of the floor making me shiver, the hangover adding a bit of dizziness to the movement. In my boxers, I slowly pushed myself up and padded across the floor toward the door. My bare feet made a soft thud against the floorboards as I reached for the handle, my mind still foggy from the alcohol, trying to make sense of the situation. I opened the door, just a crack, and that's when I saw them. Two guys, one wearing a hoodie and the other with a baseball cap pulled low over his face, holding the two dogs down in the hallway. The Pomeranian was squirming in the man's grip, its tiny body trying to break free, but the guy was holding it tight. The Chihuahua, just as frantic, was stuck under the other man's knee, the poor thing making squealing sounds that cut through the air. At first, I froze. I didn't know what I was looking at. My brain was trying to process the sight in front of me. Maybe they were friends. Maybe they were just playing around with the dogs. But the more I stared, the more I felt the weight of the situation. The way they were holding the dogs down didn't look right. They weren't petting them or calming them. They were trying to shut them up, but not in a way that made any sense. For a moment, I was still just watching them. My heart was beating faster now, and the room seemed to close in on me. My head felt like it was spinning, but before I could even make sense of it, I spoke. And my voice sounded harsher than I expected. "What's up?" The words came out way more aggressive than I meant them to, a growl in my voice that even surprised me. The two guys froze, their heads snapping up, and for a split second, we just stared at each other. I could feel the tension in the air. The room felt charged, like something dangerous was about to happen. Without warning, both guys bolted, turning and running for the front door. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, watching them disappear down the hallway and out of sight. I don't know why I didn't chase after them. I don't know if it was the shock, the alcohol still clouding my brain, or just the pure confusion of what had just happened. But I didn't chase them. I didn't even call out. Instead, I stepped back into the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I locked it. I don't know why I locked it, but I felt safer doing it. My mind was racing now, putting the pieces together. Those guys weren't there for a friendly visit. They were burglars. No doubt about it. They had broken into the house. They were probably looking for something to steal. I turned around and walked to the window, pulling the blinds back, just a little to peek outside. I could see the Pomeranian trotting around in the yard, no longer in distress. It was almost as if nothing had happened, like the dog was completely unaware of the danger it had been in just moments ago. But then I looked around again, and that's when I noticed the Chihuahua was gone. That's when the adrenaline hit. My hangover faded instantly, replaced by the sharp clarity of fear. I pulled the blinds shut, looking back at the door. The whole house felt eerily silent now. My stomach twisted. The dogs had been the only ones making noise, and now that they were calm, I was left alone with my thoughts, and the realization that I might have just missed something worse happening. I didn't waste any more time. I quickly pulled on my clothes, still trying to make sense of the situation. My head felt clearer now, but my pulse was still racing. What if those guys hadn't run? What if they'd attacked me? What if I hadn't heard the dogs, or worse, what if they had come for me? I opened the door again, more carefully this time. I moved quietly through the hallway, glancing into each room as I passed. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the break-in, it was the way everything felt. The house was too quiet, too still. I reached the front door and checked it. It was still locked. I went to the back door. Locked too. I checked the windows, the ones I could see from the inside, but they were secure. I didn't see anything that looked out of place. Then I stepped outside, hoping to spot the thieves. Maybe they were still lurking around, but there was nothing. No sign of them. It was like they had vanished into thin air. I walked around the house, my eyes scanning the surroundings. The neighbor's house was across the street, and I saw them sitting on their porch, sipping coffee, completely oblivious to what had just happened. I approached them, feeling a mix of relief and tension still in my chest. "Hey," I called out to them. "Did you guys see anyone around here?" Maybe a couple of guys walking by. The older couple looked up at me with confused expressions. "No, we haven't seen anyone," the man said. "You okay?" I nodded, but I was far from okay. I glanced back at the yard and saw the Pomeranian trotting around, looking fine. The dog was acting like nothing was wrong, but the anxiety in my chest wouldn't leave. I walked back to the house, my mind still racing. The Chihuahua was nowhere in sight. I called my girlfriend's cousin. Her voice was a little panicked when she answered, and I could tell she was worried about the dogs. I told her what had happened, and that the guys had bolted when I confronted them. I asked if the Chihuahua had been found, and she told me she hadn't seen it yet. I felt a sharp pang of guilt. What if something had happened to it? I knew it was safe with her cousin, but still, I couldn't shake the thought of what those guys could have done if I hadn't caught them. It wasn't long before her cousin and her boyfriend arrived. They went looking around the neighborhood and soon came back with the Chihuahua. It had wandered off but was unharmed. I don't know how or why it had gotten away from the thieves, but I was relieved to see it. As we sat there, calming the dogs and trying to make sense of everything, I realized how lucky I was. No one got hurt. The dogs were okay. I was okay. But as I sat there, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what had almost happened. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't woken up when I did, things could have gone much worse. It was a reminder of how quickly everything can change, how a normal morning can turn into something terrifying in the blink of an eye. I didn't say much the rest of the day. I just sat there, letting the adrenaline leave my body, grateful that it was over. Grateful I wasn't dead. Grateful I wasn't stabbed or shot. But I knew one thing for sure. I'd never forget that feeling. The moment when I opened the door and saw those two strangers, the adrenaline kicking in, the realization that something was wrong, and the pure terror that followed. And the part that stuck with me the most? That no matter how tough you are, no matter how big you are, life can throw a curveball when you least expect it. And if you're lucky, like I was, you get to walk away from it. But sometimes that's not enough. You can't always count on luck. Sometimes all you have is yourself, your instincts, and the will to keep moving forward. And that day, that's all that saved me. It was a few days before Halloween, and the air in the apartment complex was dense with the usual mix of everyday noise. People coming and going, the sound of children playing outside, and the hum of traffic just beyond the walls. The smell of laundry detergent and dinner, mixed with a touch of anxiety, hung in the air as my mother stood in the middle of our apartment, telling us one of her ghost stories. She managed the complex, and she had an almost endless supply of strange tales to share. But this one was different. She said it with such sincerity that it made me uncomfortable, a chill crawling up my spine as she spoke. "Did you know?" she began, her voice steady, though there was something in her eyes, something like hesitation, that I hadn't noticed before. The apartment above us used to belong to a woman and her 2 little boys. But one night something happened. They were found dead, right in the apartment upstairs. She paused, taking a breath, and her eyes flickered to the ceiling as if she could hear something just above us. They say if you listen closely, you can still hear their footsteps running up and down the hall. Their little feet, just like they used to do when they were alive, always racing, never stopping. The silence that followed her words felt heavy, oppressive. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was how she told it. It didn't feel like a simple story. It felt real. And then, as if on cue, we all heard it. A faint pattering sound. The unmistakable sound of footsteps running across the floor above us, quick and erratic. My mother froze, her face draining of color as her eyes locked onto the ceiling. My heart dropped into my stomach. The sound of little feet, running, exactly as she described. I could see the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just the fear of a spooky story coming to life. It was something deeper, something raw. She stood there, staring at the ceiling, her face pale. For a moment, I thought she was going to tell us it was just a coincidence. But she didn't. She picked up the phone, dialed the number for the local cop that patrolled our neighborhood, and then immediately called the on-duty maintenance guy. "Get to the apartment above us now," she said, her voice firm but trembling. We all waited in silence, the sound of running footsteps still echoing above us. It felt like an eternity, the minutes dragging by as we sat in the living room, waiting for someone to show up. I didn't know what to think. Was it just kids playing around? Maybe some weird coincidence. But my mother was scared, and I could feel it in the air. When the officer and the maintenance guy finally arrived, they rushed up to the apartment above us. They were gone for a while, long enough to make my mother's anxiety grow by the minute. Eventually, they came back downstairs. The officer didn't say much, but the maintenance guy was visibly shaken. "You're not going to believe this," he said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. There was a homeless woman living in the apartment. She'd slipped in through a window that was left open. She had 2 kids with her. They've been living up there for who knows how long. My mother's face went even paler, if that was even possible. "We had no idea," she muttered under her breath, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know if she was talking to me or to herself. The idea of someone living up there unnoticed, in an apartment that was supposed to be vacant, was horrifying. The thought of those kids running around, heard by no one but us, sent a shiver through me that I couldn't shake. It wasn't a ghost story anymore. It was reality. And after that, my mother never told another ghost story again. But that wasn't the end of the strange things that happened in the apartments. A few years later, we moved to a different complex, bigger, newer, and supposedly safer. My mom still managed it, and I was older, more aware of the world around me. It was a typical weekday when my mom asked me to go with her to check the vacant apartments. It was just the 2 of us, no maintenance guys working that day. We went from one apartment to the next, checking for any issues, broken locks, cracked windows, things that needed fixing. Everything was normal, just routine, until we got to one apartment that stood out. The door opened by itself as we approached. There was no need to turn the knob. The lock was broken, something that was common in these kinds of places. I didn't think anything of it at first, assuming neighborhood kids had gotten in and broken the lock. "Looks like someone's been messing with the place," my mom muttered, pushing the door open. I stood in the living room, looking out the window as she walked toward the master bedroom. The apartment was eerily quiet. And then I heard it. A scream. A woman's scream. I bolted toward the sound, adrenaline surging through me as I ran down the hallway. I reached the bedroom just in time to see my mother standing frozen in the doorway, her face contorted in shock and fear. In the closet, there was a girl. A pale, thin girl, no older than 15, crouched in the corner. Her skin was nearly translucent, and she was half naked. Her nails were dug deep into the wall, her fingers twisted in desperation as she breathed in ragged gasps. Her eyes were wide with terror, her pupils dilated. My mother's voice shook as she told me to go get help. "Get the security guard. Now," she urged, her voice cracking. I didn't hesitate. I turned and sprinted for the office, but as I passed the kitchen, I saw something that stopped me cold. A man. He was tall, probably about 6 feet 3 inches, and he was running toward the back door. His face was twisted in panic, his movements erratic. I don't know how, but my legs moved before I could even think. I chased him, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. I ran down the stairwell, out the door, and into the parking lot. I could hear his footsteps just ahead of me, but I was closing the gap. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I chased him for what felt like forever, 400, 500 feet at least. But eventually, I lost sight of him. He was gone. I stood there in the middle of the lot, breathless and terrified. I didn't know what to do. I felt sick. I had no idea who the girl was, or why she was in that closet, but I knew she was in trouble. I ran back to the office, where the security guard had already been notified. He was on the phone with the police, and soon, everything was a blur of officers, paramedics, and questions. The girl was taken away, and the man, who I later found out had been living in the apartment complex, using it as a hiding place, was arrested. It was only later that I pieced it all together. The girl had been in the middle of being assaulted when we walked in. The whole thing had happened while we were just a few steps away. I'll never forget the look in her eyes. I can still see it now, all these years later. The terror, the helplessness, and I'll never forget the man I chased. He was nothing more than a shadow in the distance, but he will always be a part of this story, a part of that nightmare. That was the last time I went into an apartment without checking everything, every inch, no matter how normal it seemed. Some things, once you see them, are never forgotten. And that was the last time I saw any trace of the girl, or heard about the man who almost got away. But sometimes, when I pass those old complexes, I can't help but wonder what else might have been hiding behind those broken doors. I remember the exact day it happened. It was a Tuesday, late spring. Not hot yet, but the air had that warm edge that hinted summer wasn't far off. I was sitting in my office at the time, sipping some lukewarm coffee, halfway through a spreadsheet that had been giving me a headache for hours. It was just a normal workday, nothing special about it. No sense that anything strange or memorable was about to happen. I had my head buried in numbers, lost in the monotony of my job, when my phone rang. That alone was weird. It was my wife. At the time, we were still married, though things between us had already started shifting in that subtle, uneasy way that couples don't like to admit at first. She worked the night shift at a hospital across town, so she was usually asleep during the day. I rarely heard from her before mid-afternoon. When her name flashed on my screen around 11 a.m., I immediately thought something was wrong. My stomach dropped the way it does when you expect bad news, though I had no reason to feel that way yet. I picked up, expecting to hear something about her being sick, maybe a problem with her car, or an emergency with one of her co-workers. Instead, she just said she needed me to do something for her. She sounded groggy and disoriented, like someone who just woke up from a deep sleep. She told me I needed to call my friend Danny and check in on him and his family. She couldn't explain why. She didn't have a story, or a reason, or anything to point to. She just said she had a dream. That was it. A dream she couldn't even remember, apparently. She just woke up with this overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. She couldn't shake it. I didn't know what to make of that. At the time, I brushed it off as leftover anxiety or one of those weird half-dream, half-real sensations people sometimes get when they're overtired. But she was serious. Not panicked, not hysterical, just deeply unsettled. It wasn't like her to be dramatic, so I promised her I'd call. I hung up and stared at the phone for a few seconds. Part of me wanted to just go back to work and forget about it. The other part of me, the bigger part, felt like it wouldn't cost me anything to check in with Danny. We'd been friends since high school. He was the kind of guy you could not see for a year and pick up right where you left off. We'd both gotten busy with work and family, but I still considered him one of my closest friends. I called him a few minutes later. He picked up right away, and I told him that my wife had a weird dream and wanted me to make sure he and the family were okay. I tried to make it sound casual, like a little quirk of hers. He laughed a little, said everyone was fine, and thanked me for calling. He said it was nice of her to think of them, even if it was just a dream. He sounded completely normal. There was no tension in his voice, no sense of worry. We talked for a few minutes about work, his plans for the weekend, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I felt relieved. I hung up and called my wife back, told her that everything was fine, that Danny said thank you. She didn't sound convinced. She said she still had a bad feeling. That sat with me for a moment, but I chalked it up to lingering emotions from the dream. I told her to try and get some more sleep, and that I'd see her that evening. I went back to my spreadsheet. That would have been the end of it, just a strange little footnote in an otherwise normal day. But later, much later, after everything happened, I kept replaying that moment in my head, trying to remember if there had been something in his voice, some hidden note, some unspoken fear that I'd missed. But there hadn't been. It was just a normal conversation. That's what made it all so strange. About a week went by, maybe a little less. I didn't think about the dream much after that day. My wife never brought it up again, and neither did I. Things went back to normal. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Danny. This time, it was his voice that didn't sound right. He was quiet, not crying, but right on the edge of it, like someone who'd already cried too much and didn't have anything left. He told me his son had taken his own life. I sat there in silence for a few seconds, not even sure I'd heard him correctly. I had to ask him to repeat it. I couldn't believe it. I knew his son. He was a good kid. Young, bright, polite, a little shy. He couldn't have been more than 17. I'd seen him not that long ago, maybe a couple months before, helping his dad load lumber into a truck. He looked fine. Normal. Apparently, Danny had gotten the news from his uncle in Florida, who'd been the one to receive the initial call. His son had been found in the garage, hanging from the ceiling beam with an extension cord. The neighbor had found him. His mom had been at work. Danny had been in a meeting and hadn't answered his phone for over an hour. When he finally called back, it was too late. The ambulance had already come and gone. It happened the same day I'd called him. He told me, in a quiet voice that I'll never forget, that the time of death was estimated to be right around noon, within half an hour of our phone call. He said the call from Florida came in maybe 20-30 minutes after we talked. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. It didn't make any sense. There had been no warning, no note. No fights, no signs. Just a sudden, awful absence. And that dream. I told Danny about the timing, about how my wife had called me out of the blue and told me to check on him. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said thank you, quietly, like someone trying to be polite, even though nothing felt real anymore. I didn't know what else to say, so I didn't press it. He had enough to deal with without trying to make sense of something we couldn't explain. That night, I told my wife everything. We sat on the couch, lights off, just the glow of the TV bouncing off the walls. She didn't cry. She just nodded, staring straight ahead, and said, "I knew it." That's all she said. She didn't try to explain it, didn't act like it was anything special. She just accepted it, like someone who's used to feelings they can't explain. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about Danny, about his wife, about their daughter, who would grow up without her big brother. I thought about that kid, alone in the garage, making a decision that would ripple out for years. I thought about the fact that maybe, just maybe, he was still alive when I made that phone call. Maybe even in the middle of it. Maybe he heard the phone ringing upstairs and didn't answer it. Maybe he was already gone. That thought haunts me more than anything else. Not because I think I could have stopped it, but because of the nearness, the overlap, the sheer closeness of it all. After the funeral, things between my wife and I got more strained. Not because of that event directly, but because we didn't really know how to talk about it. It was like this unspoken thing that hung between us. I don't think either of us wanted to deal with how it made us feel. She had always been more intuitive, more in tune with the emotional side of things, while I was the kind of person who needed facts, data, logic. That event cut straight through that divide and left both of us standing on opposite shores, staring at something we couldn't make sense of. Eventually, we divorced. It wasn't bitter, not dramatic. Just two people drifting apart. But even now, years later, I still think about that day. I still think about the phone call, the dream, and the impossible timing of it all. I don't believe in psychics or ghosts or anything like that. I never have. But I do believe there are things we don't understand. Things that exist on the edges of our awareness. Things that slip through in dreams or instincts or strange feelings that don't make any sense until later. People talk about gut feelings like they're just emotion, just nerves. But sometimes I wonder if there's something more. A signal we don't know how to read. I don't talk to Danny much these days. We touch base once in a while, birthdays or holidays. He and his wife moved to another state a few years back, trying to start fresh. He never talks about his son, and I never ask. It's just one of those things that lives in the background, quiet and heavy. As for my ex-wife, we're on decent terms. We text occasionally, usually about something small, mutual friends, something we saw on the news. We never talked about that dream again. I think she's had others. I think she probably doesn't tell anyone anymore. I don't know what that dream meant. I don't know if it was coincidence or something else. But I know it happened. I know she felt it. I know I called Danny at the exact time he needed someone, anyone, to reach out, even if he didn't know it yet. Sometimes I wonder if maybe that call gave him something to hold on to, even if just for a moment. A reminder that someone was thinking about him, that someone cared. Maybe that didn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but maybe it meant something. And maybe, when all's said and done, that's all any of us can really do. Pay attention. Listen to the feelings we can't explain. Make the call. Say the words. Show up, even when we don't understand why. Because sometimes, that's the only thing standing between silence and something worse. It was a crisp evening in Pasadena when I found myself giving our 3-year-old son a bath. The kind of quiet evening that makes the house feel warmer, even in the coolness of the early fall night. Our house, an old craftsman built in the 1930s, always had a certain charm to it. The creaky floors, the old windows that rattled a bit with every gust of wind, and the beautiful wooden details that had survived the decades. It was our dream home, a place where we thought we'd build memories and grow as a family. But that night, something shifted in the air, something that left me unsettled for reasons I couldn't fully grasp at first. I had just finished soaping up his back when my son, sitting in the tub with water splashing around him, suddenly stopped. His little hands rested on the edge of the tub, and his gaze went distant. He wasn't looking at me or the toys floating beside him. His eyes were fixed somewhere behind me, staring intently. I froze, wondering what had caught his attention. It wasn't like him to zone out like that, especially in the middle of bath time when we usually chatted or sang silly songs together. His stare deepened, and I followed his gaze, trying to figure out what had him so transfixed. The bathroom door was cracked open, letting in a faint stream of light from the hallway. Nothing moved. After a moment of silence, he turned to me, his eyes wide, and asked, "Why does Grandma call Mommy a funny name?" I blinked, unsure of what he meant. We'd never talked about nicknames or anything of the sort. I thought he was talking about my mom, and I responded without really thinking. "What do you mean? Who do you mean by Grandma?" He paused for a moment, then repeated, "Why does Grandma call Mommy?" I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The name he mentioned, it was a nickname my wife's mother used to call her. A nickname that no one else ever used. One that my wife's mom had called her since she was a little girl. My wife and I had never used that nickname ourselves, nor had we ever mentioned it to our son. I turned back to him, trying to compose myself. "Where did you hear that?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He looked at me, his little face innocent as ever, and simply said, "The farmer told me." I felt a chill run through me, though I tried to hide it. "The farmer?" I asked, confused. "His friend," my son replied, almost casually, as if the explanation made perfect sense to him. I didn't know how to process that. We'd never talked about anyone named the farmer, and there was no reason for him to know anything about that nickname. My thoughts raced, but I tried to stay calm for my son's sake. Later that night, I told my wife what had happened. Her reaction was immediate. Her face paled as I recounted the conversation, and she stared at me for a long time after I finished. She couldn't make sense of it either, but she knew the nickname, and hearing our son say it left her unsettled. We both knew there was no way he could have known it. He was just a toddler. And then there was the mention of the farmer. Who was that? I didn't want to believe in anything supernatural, but the whole thing had a feeling to it that I couldn't shake. My wife, still shaken, hugged me tightly. We decided not to dwell on it too much, telling ourselves that it was just a weird coincidence. Kids say strange things all the time, right? But deep down, I could tell it bothered her more than she let on. The next weekend, things took another unsettling turn. I was home alone with our son again, while my wife was at work. It was a quiet Saturday, and I was working on a few things around the house when I heard him talking. He was in his room, and the door was slightly open. It was the kind of talking that sounded like a conversation. I walked closer, wondering who he could be talking to, and as I stood outside the door, I heard him say things like yes, no, and I don't know that, followed by soft laughter. I pushed the door open gently, and there he was, sitting on the floor, surrounded by his toys. He wasn't playing with anything in particular, just talking to the air around him. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping inside. He looked up at me and said, "Playing." "Who are you playing with?" I asked, now growing more curious. "The farmer," he replied matter-of-factly, as if that was the most normal thing in the world. My heart skipped again, and I tried to stay calm, though I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I asked, "Where's the farmer now?" He simply said, "He left when you came in." I stood frozen for a moment. The room felt heavier, and my mind started racing. The farmer again. What did he mean by that? Who was the farmer? This was the second time he'd mentioned this mysterious figure, and now it was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like something I couldn't explain. When my wife came home later that evening, I told her about what happened. She was equally disturbed, and we both sat in the living room, quietly trying to make sense of everything. We had no answers, and we weren't sure how to feel. But we agreed that if this happened again, we'd have to figure out what was going on. A few days later, it happened again, in the middle of the night. I was half awake when I heard our son talking again. This time, his voice was clearer, and he was sitting up in bed. I could hear him from the hallway, his words drifting out of the room. "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore," he said, sounding serious. My wife and I exchanged worried glances, both of us getting up and heading to his room. When we walked in, he was sitting on the edge of his bed, wide-eyed and quiet. We asked him if he was okay, and he simply nodded, but then added, "Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." It was too much to ignore. I tried to hide my growing sense of dread, but my wife's face was pale, her expression a mixture of confusion and fear. What was going on? Why was he saying this? And why had he stopped talking about the farmer after that night? We never heard him mention the farmer again. Not once. It was as if the entire thing had been wiped from his memory, and eventually, so much time passed that we started to convince ourselves it was just a strange phase, a weird thing that kids sometimes do. But my wife and I never forgot it. Fast forward to today. Our son is 13 now, and he doesn't remember any of it. We never brought it up to him, never wanted to make him feel uncomfortable or confused. But my wife and I remember. We still talk about it from time to time, though we rarely speak of it aloud. It's one of those things that we can't quite explain. Was it just a strange coincidence? A figment of his imagination? Or something else entirely? We'll never know for sure. But we don't talk about the farmer anymore. Some things are better left unsaid. And sometimes, late at night, when I hear the wind rattling the windows or a floorboard creak in the distance, I wonder if there's something more to those strange moments than we'll ever understand. We still live in that old house, but things are different now. We don't feel the same warmth in the walls like we used to. It's not because of the house itself, but because of what we experienced in those quiet moments. Something changed. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a fairy tale. But whatever it was, it's a part of us now. And maybe, just maybe, it always will be. That night still haunts me, even though it happened so many years ago. It was just before Christmas, and I was 12 years old, trying to settle into my new life after moving to my dad's. I didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with. I'd been here for 2 years now, but still, it felt like I didn't really belong. It wasn't exactly home. There was a girl a couple of years older than me. Let's call her Sarah. I wasn't close to her, but we ended up hanging out in the same group of friends. She had a younger brother, Tim, and we'd all play together sometimes, though it was more out of habit than anything else. That night, though, things felt different. I had no idea how wrong things would go when I walked into that house that evening. Rob, one of my friends, had been hanging out at Sarah's house. Her mom was at work, so the house was quiet. Rob didn't think anything of it when he got there. The house wasn't big, but it was cozy. It had that familiar, lived-in smell, wood floors, the faint scent of something baking, and the hum of the fridge. We didn't know it at the time, but Rob was the lucky one. He was the one who got out. The situation started with something as mundane as a knock on the door. Sarah, just like anyone else, thought it was her mom. She knew exactly how her mom knocked when she came home. It was a rhythm she'd heard so many times she could recognize it without even thinking. So, Sarah answered the door without hesitation. Rob didn't stay long. He wasn't supposed to be there. He knew that, but he'd left through the window and ran down the road before anything happened. He didn't even look back, not realizing how close he had come to being in danger. And that was the moment everything went wrong. It wasn't her mom at the door. It was the sister of the woman her mom had been helping through her work. The woman had been in a mental institution, but she had been released not too long ago. That was all we knew about her until later. Sarah didn't recognize the woman at the door. She wasn't expecting her. But this woman had figured out who Sarah's family was. She had gotten details about their lives by talking to her sister, and somehow she had pieced it together, where they lived when Sarah's mom worked. The woman knew everything she needed to know. The woman didn't waste any time. She forced her way inside. I don't know exactly what happened next, and honestly, I'm glad I don't. All I knew was that things escalated quickly, and Tim, Sarah's younger brother, somehow managed to escape. He ran to the neighbors, breathless, scared out of his mind. He called the police, but by then, it was too late. The woman had already done what she came for. Sarah was dead. I found out the details the next morning, when my dad sat me down. I didn't understand at first. How could anyone understand something like this? Her body was found in a bathtub, decapitated, naked. It was beyond anything I could even imagine. The police found her head hidden somewhere, and they had to sift through Christmas presents to find it. I don't know how they did it, but they did. I never found out exactly where they found her head, and part of me wishes I hadn't known anything at all. The part that stuck with me, the part one couldn't shake off, was how utterly normal everything seemed right before it happened. The knock on the door. The normalcy of a Wednesday night, a few days before Christmas. Sarah had no idea that the woman standing on the other side of the door wasn't just a stranger. She was a threat, and she had already planned what she was going to do. She knew exactly how to find Sarah's family, and she used that knowledge for something terrifying and evil. I never went to Sarah's funeral. My dad wouldn't let me. He said it was too dangerous, that there were people there who might be too emotional, too upset. Maybe he didn't want me to see it. I never asked. Her mom never came back after that. There were rumors, but I don't know if they were true. Some said she went into a depression that never lifted, and some said she never recovered from losing Sarah like that. It's hard to blame her. How could anyone recover from something like that? In the years that followed, I never saw Sarah's family again. They moved away, and eventually the house was sold. It felt like a bad memory that no one wanted to remember, but it was still there. It lingered in the air, in the places where Sarah used to be, in the faces of people who never really spoke about her, even though she was gone. People didn't know how to talk about it, how to say her name without it feeling like a wound that would never heal. As for me, I never felt safe in the same way again. The world didn't seem as secure as it once had. When I was younger, I thought bad things only happened to other people, to people who lived in other places, who lived different lives. But now I knew better. Bad things could happen to anyone. It wasn't fair, but it was true. I spent a long time questioning how something like that could happen. It felt like the world had tilted off its axis, and I couldn't figure out how to get it back to normal. But the thing is, it never did. Not for me, not for Sarah's family, and not for anyone who knew what had happened. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Rob hadn't left so quickly, if he had stayed, if he had heard something, done something. But then again, I realize he was just a kid, like all of us. And there was nothing anyone could have done to change the outcome. That night changed everything. It took away something I didn't even know I had, a sense of safety, a belief that nothing truly horrible could happen where I lived. From that point on, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were dangers out there that I couldn't see. The world was a lot more unpredictable than I had ever imagined. Years later, I still think about Sarah, about what happened to her, about how suddenly everything could shift from normal to unspeakable. And I wonder if things would have been different if that woman hadn't found out where they lived, hadn't known everything about them. But then I realize I'll never know. I'll never know what Sarah was thinking when she opened that door, when she let that woman inside. I'll never know what it felt like to be in her shoes, just minutes before her life was taken from her in the most horrific way imaginable. All I know is that nothing will ever be the same again. I remember the first time my mom told me about that night, and it still sends a chill down my spine every time she brings it up. The way she talks about it, the fear in her voice, it's like she's reliving it every time, even though it happened when she was a teenager. My mom is in her mid-60s now, but when she tells me this story, it's like I can see the 16-year-old girl she once was, lying awake in the dark, listening to the sounds that still haunt her to this day. She's never been one to talk much about religion or anything overly spiritual. Sure, she prays every night, but it's more of a habit, a comfort, rather than something she deeply invests in. She's not the type to go to church or read the Bible regularly, but she believes in something deeper than any of us can understand, and I think this experience is the reason for it. We were watching some movies one night, nothing too crazy, just the usual horror flicks. It was always a thing we did together when I was younger. Nothing too gory or terrifying, just spooky stuff that got your heart racing a little. I remember asking her if she wanted to watch The Exorcist, and she shut it down immediately. I thought it was strange, so I asked her why. That's when she first told me. She said there was absolutely no way she would ever watch anything about possession or exorcisms. Her tone was so firm, so unyielding, that I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to her. It was a simple question, but she acted like I'd suggested we jump off a cliff together. Why not? I asked, half joking. It's just a movie, Mom. She looked at me with this strange look in her eyes. It was like she wasn't looking at me at all, but was seeing something far beyond. I don't care what it is. I will never watch anything about that stuff. That was when I got curious. So I showed her the trailer for Constantine, thinking it might be a little more up her alley. But when she saw the part in the beginning where a girl crawled up the ceiling, she recoiled, her face going pale. No, she said, not this either. I won't watch it. It wasn't just the movie, though. Over the years, I learned that my mom would refuse to even speak about certain things. There was one thing in particular that would set her off, an Ouija board. She would absolutely lose it if anyone brought up the idea of using one. If she even heard the word, she would scream at you to drop it, shout until you left the subject alone. I never understood why she was so adamant about it, but I was beginning to understand the deeper roots of her fear. One evening, I finally asked her why she felt this way about all of it, the exorcisms, the Ouija boards, the things that most people just shrugged off. I told her I didn't get it. She took a deep breath, looking out the window for a moment as if the past were coming back to her. And then she told me the story. Her story. When she was 16, she went to a sleepover at a friend's house. The kind of sleepover where you stay up late playing games and eating junk food, and the parents are in the living room watching TV. They were on the floor, laughing, playing a board game that my mom had never seen before. At the time, she didn't know what it was, but her friends had told her it was called an Ouija board. It wasn't anything special to them, just something to pass the time, something they had used before. My mom, not knowing the history or the warnings, thought it was just a game. Little did she know, that night would change everything. They started asking the board simple questions, silly things, like who would be their future husbands, or who had the most crushes in the room. But then, they decided to ask a more serious question. The atmosphere in the room had shifted slightly, though my mom didn't notice it at the time. As they pressed the planchette, it moved. They asked if there was anyone in the house with them. The planchette slowly slid across the board, stopping at the word yes. Everyone laughed nervously, but it wasn't the same kind of nervous laughter. It was more forced, more uncertain. Still, they pushed on, asking more questions. And with every answer, the feeling in the room became heavier, colder. But it wasn't until they asked, "Who are you?" that things really started to get strange. The planchette began to move again, and it moved in big circles, so fast that at first, my mom thought someone was pushing it from underneath. She thought maybe one of her friends was messing with her. But when the planchette stopped, it was at the letters D-E-V-I-L. The room went silent. Someone had to be messing with them, right? This was just a prank. But no one said anything. They all sat there, staring at the board. The silence hung heavy in the air, and it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. They were too scared to speak, but someone finally dared to ask, "Are you the devil?" The planchette didn't move immediately, but then, after what felt like an eternity, it slowly slid to yes. My mom's heart began to pound in her chest, her palms sweating as she looked around at her friends. Nobody was laughing anymore. The feeling of unease had turned into pure dread, thick and suffocating. And then, the lights went out. It wasn't just the lights in the room. Every light in the house, every room, the kitchen, the hallway, even the TV in the living room, snapped off all at once. My mom heard her friends gasp in the dark, and she felt the air turn impossibly cold. But just as quickly as the lights went out, they snapped back on. But something was wrong. The TV in the living room flickered, and for a moment, the reflection in the screen wasn't their own. It was something else, something dark, something she couldn't quite make out. A shape crouched next to them. Her heart stopped. The chill in the room deepened, and before she could even process what she had seen, the air grew unbearably cold. Her breath became visible in front of her face, and she could feel it. Something was there with them. Something that shouldn't be. Suddenly, the noise started. It came from the kitchen. Loud, crashing noises, like something was being thrown from the top of the refrigerator, things clattering and smashing to the floor. Doors to the cupboards began to bang open and shut, as if something was trying to escape. In a blind panic, they stopped the game. My mom, trembling, grabbed the board and threw it into the trash. It was over. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, but the dread didn't leave. The terror clung to them as they went to bed that night, their hearts still racing in their chests. But it didn't end there. In the middle of the night, my mom woke up to a loud noise on the roof. It sounded like chains, metal chains dragging, scraping across the shingles. And then she heard it. Dogs. Not just one or two, but a whole pack of them, barking and snarling. She lay in bed, her heart pounding, listening, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. But the sound wasn't coming from the street. It wasn't coming from anywhere in the neighborhood. It was on the roof. The dogs and the chains, right above her. She didn't sleep much after that, not with the sounds still echoing in her head. The next morning, when she spoke to her friend's parents, they told her they had heard it too. They heard the chains and the dogs. When my mom told me this, I could see it in her eyes. The same fear she had felt back then. I've seen her laugh about other scary stories, but this one, she never jokes about it. Ever. She believes the devil was there that night, sitting right next to them. And the worst part, she knows it wasn't just a nightmare or a trick of the mind. It was real. She's convinced of it. That's why she refuses to watch anything about possession or exorcisms. She believes, down to her core, that whatever happened in that house, whatever she felt, was something beyond her understanding. And maybe, just maybe, it was something that never really left. When I was a kid, there was one thing I dreaded more than anything else. Taking my clothes down to the basement to put them in the laundry. I don't know what it was about that place, but it terrified me to my core. The basement wasn't finished, and it felt like the walls were closing in on you. The dark corners, the old wooden beams, the damp smell. It was a place that always seemed to be watching, as if it had a life of its own. Every time I had to go down there, I'd get this sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, and my feet would drag. I would look over my shoulder, half expecting something to be there, but nothing ever was, at least not when I was looking. I had nightmares about that basement. Not just once, but again and again. The same dream would come to me, and it was always so vivid that I could never escape it, no matter how hard I tried. I'd be in the house, just going about my day, but at some point I'd feel it, the time was coming. I don't know how to explain it, but I could feel it deep in my bones. It was a cold, eerie feeling, like the air had shifted. Everything would get quiet, too quiet, and I knew that something bad was about to happen. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a certainty. I'd rush to hide under the kitchen table, trying to stay as still as possible, barely breathing. The kitchen door led straight into the basement, and I knew that if I wasn't careful, if I wasn't quiet enough, whatever it was that was coming would find me. I would huddle there, trembling, trying not to make a sound, trying to shrink into the shadows of the table. And then it would happen. The basement door would creak open, and I'd see the legs of a man. He'd never come into view fully, just his legs, dark pants, and heavy boots moving slowly across the kitchen floor. I couldn't see his face, and that was the worst part. I never knew who he was, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be seen by him. I didn't want to know what would happen if I were. I couldn't move. I couldn't make a sound. My heart would race, and my stomach would churn. I just had to stay hidden. I could feel his presence even though I never saw his face, and it was as though he knew I was there, under the table, paralyzed with fear. Sometimes, in my dreams, the nightmare would shift. I'd find myself walking down the stairs into the basement, just like I had done 100 times before. I could see the light streaming down from the windows, so it didn't seem so bad. It was daylight after all. But as I took the last step, everything would go pitch black. The kind of darkness that you could feel in your chest, the kind that suffocates you. And in that moment, I would feel a hand grab my ankle. I could never explain the terror that would flood through me. I always knew what was coming, but I could never stop myself from walking down those stairs. My legs would move on their own, and then nothing. Just cold, suffocating darkness, and that feeling of something reaching out for me. The nightmares didn't stop. In fact, the more I had them, the more real they felt. Every time I was near the basement, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me down there, just beyond the light. I tried to avoid going into the basement as much as possible. It was a place I feared, and for a long time, it felt like my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew there was something wrong with that basement. Something I couldn't explain. One day, my mom asked me to take my laundry down to the basement. I was home alone, except for my dog, a small, scrappy mutt that I'd grown up with. She had always been a little skittish, but she was good company when I had to go down into that terrible basement. Maybe if I took her with me, it wouldn't be so bad, I thought. I grabbed my basket of clothes and called for her. She trotted over, wagging her tail, eager to follow me anywhere. We made our way to the basement door, and I could feel the familiar dread settling in my stomach. The door was old and creaky, but it didn't seem as bad today. The sunlight was streaming in through the small slit windows, casting thin beams of light that cut through the dust in the air. For a moment, it seemed less threatening. I figured I could handle it this time. I had the dog with me, after all. She was my safety, my comfort. I'd gotten so used to the nightmares that I almost convinced myself this wouldn't be so bad. I walked into the basement, tossing my clothes onto the pile next to the laundry machine. It wasn't as dark as usual, not with the daylight streaming through the windows. I felt a little bolder, maybe even a little cocky. I wasn't going to let my fear control me. Not today. I made my way back to the stairs, but as I took my first step up, I froze. I couldn't explain it, but something was wrong. The air had shifted. The basement felt colder, even though the light was still coming through the windows. My dog, who had been walking beside me just moments before, was now standing at the bottom of the stairs, her ears perked up, staring at something in the darkness. I hesitated for a second, but then I heard it, a loud, thudding noise. It wasn't just a noise. It was the sound of something or someone scrambling up the stairs behind me. My heart stopped, and all the air left my lungs. I turned quickly, but I couldn't see anything. I didn't even have time to react. My brain went blank. My body didn't move. I could hear the scrambling, getting louder, closer. My breath quickened. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my feet barely touching the ground, my heart thundering in my chest. I was moving as fast as I could, but the sound behind me wasn't slowing down. It was almost like whatever it was behind me was right on my heels. The thudding sound was so loud now that I couldn't even hear my own footsteps. I scrambled up the stairs, my legs shaking with fear. And then, just as I reached the top, I felt it, the pressure of something right behind me. My knees buckled, and I fell onto the stairs, curling up into a ball. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping against hope that whatever it was wouldn't see me. I didn't know what was coming. I didn't know if it was going to hurt me or something worse. But I had never been so terrified in my life. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stayed there, holding my knees to my chest, waiting for whatever was coming to reach me. But then, out of nowhere, I felt a lick on my face, warm and wet. At first, I thought it was part of the nightmare, but then I realized it was my dog, licking my cheek, excited and wagging her tail. She had been behind me the whole time, playing a new game, *race you up the stairs star. I sat up slowly, the fear draining from my body as reality set back in. I looked around, and there was nothing there, no man's legs, no terrifying creature from my nightmares. Just the familiar, comforting sight of the basement stairs and my dog, who was wagging her tail, totally oblivious to the panic she had caused. I let out a shaky breath and laughed nervously. I couldn't believe I had let my mind get the best of me. I had worked myself up so much that I'd created a monster out of my own fear. I stood up and gave my dog a pat on the head. "You scared me half to death, you little weirdo," I said, my voice still trembling slightly. But the terror had passed, and in its place was a sense of relief. I had made it out of the basement, no worse for wear. I quickly finished what I needed to do and hurried up the stairs, my dog following at my heels. I didn't stop to look back, and I never went into that basement the same way again. The nightmares didn't stop right away, but after that day, I knew that whatever I feared wasn't real. Not in the way I had always imagined it. Maybe the basement was just a dark, scary place. Maybe I had built it up in my mind more than it deserved. But as I grew older, I realized that fear can sometimes be the worst thing. It takes something as simple as a dog to remind you that what you're afraid of might just be a figment of your imagination. And I finally stopped being afraid of the basement. I remember the day like it was yesterday, even though it happened years ago. It was winter, the kind of cold that made your breath freeze in the air as soon as it left your mouth. The kind of cold that bites at your skin, and no matter how many layers you wear, it feels like you're still standing naked in the wind. But that didn't stop us. It never did. My brother and I had been hunting together for as long as I could remember, and if there was one thing about my older brother, it was that he was a damn good hunter. Better than anyone I'd ever met, in fact. He had a knack for spotting game that no one else could. Sometimes, he'd even spot something before I even knew what he was looking at. It was like he could see things in the distance that were invisible to the rest of us. He could spot game like a hawk. I had been out hunting with him plenty of times before, but this time was different. We were out fox hunting, something we'd done a few times in the past. Fox hunting in winter was tricky. Foxes, being the smart animals they are, have figured out how to survive the cold by curling up on the highest points in the area, where the sun keeps them warm. It's something most people don't know unless they've spent as much time in the woods as my brother and I had. But on that day, we were walking through the trees, crunching over the snow that had packed down beneath our boots. The air was silent, almost too silent, if that makes any sense. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, like everything is waiting for something to happen. We were about halfway up the hill when my brother suddenly stopped. He held up a hand, a signal for me to stop too, and then he whispered, "Down." It was the way he said it, low and controlled, like something important was about to happen. So, I did what he said and dropped to my knees in the snow. I didn't ask questions. That was the way he worked. He didn't talk much while hunting, but when he did, you listened. I crouched low, my back pressed against the cold, rough bark of a tree. I tried not to make a sound, tried to breathe as quietly as I could, but the cold made my breath visible, hanging in the air like a cloud. We were in the middle of a thick patch of trees, but there was a clearing ahead of us, a small hill with snow on top, the kind of spot where a fox might lie. And that's when I saw it. At first, I didn't notice it. It just looked like a lump in the snow. But then, as I focused, I realized it was a fox, curled up on top of the hill. It was still, its body forming a perfect ball in the snow, its reddish-brown fur blending into the snow and earth around it. It was hard to make out at first, but my brother could see it. He always could. He pulled his rifle up slowly, never taking his eyes off the fox. I had seen him do this 100 times. He was calm, precise, and never in a hurry. I wasn't even sure if I was supposed to see the fox yet, but I trusted my brother, so I stayed quiet. I stayed still. My brother's breath came out in slow, controlled bursts. He had his rifle aimed, and I could see him gently flick the safety off with his thumb, just one smooth motion. His finger hovered over the trigger. In those moments, time felt like it slowed down. Everything was in slow motion, like I could feel the cold air wrap around me, the snow beneath my knees, even the steady rhythm of my heartbeat in my chest. I could hear my brother's breathing, his focus so sharp that it was almost like nothing else existed except the fox in front of us. But then, just as my brother was about to pull the trigger, something happened. The fox, which had been completely still up until that point, suddenly moved. It didn't dart away or scramble to its feet. Instead, the fox turned its entire body, like it was rotating on an invisible axis. And the most bizarre part? It stayed in the same curled-up position, almost like it was still a ball, just spinning around on the snow. I blinked, not quite sure what I was seeing. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The sudden movement caught me off guard. For a moment, I thought maybe the fox was just adjusting, maybe shifting to get more comfortable. But that didn't seem right. That didn't seem like a fox at all. And that's when it hit me. What I was looking at wasn't a fox at all. I stared harder, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. It took a second, but then it clicked. It wasn't a fox. It was a person. A man wearing a fox hat, a fur hat. It had looked like a fox from a distance, but up close, it was clearly a person, a man, sitting there on the top of the hill. My brother had been ready to take a shot at a human. He had been seconds away from pulling the trigger. I couldn't believe it. The man, wearing the fox hat, had been sitting so still, so quiet, that it had fooled both of us. I felt a rush of adrenaline, a cold wave of fear. My brother hadn't pulled the trigger, thank God. If he had, that man's life would have been over in an instant. It wasn't until that moment that I realized just how close we had come to making a huge mistake. My brother didn't say a word. He didn't even move at first. But I could see his hands trembling slightly as he lowered the rifle, his fingers sliding off the trigger. He was pissed. I could see it in his face. But he didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just stared at the man in the fox hat, his eyes hard, his jaw clenched. And then, without saying a single word, my brother turned away. He started walking down the hill, back the way we came. I followed him without saying anything. Neither of us spoke for what felt like forever. The only sound was the crunch of our boots in the snow. It wasn't until we were far enough away that we could finally talk. My brother's voice was low, but there was an edge to it, like he was still processing what had almost happened. "Some asshole," he muttered under his breath. "Some idiot thinks he can just snowmobile across other people's land." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. The whole thing felt surreal. We had just almost killed someone because they were stupid enough to wear a fox hat and drive a snowmobile on land they had no business being on. I felt a sick knot in my stomach, not just because of what could have happened, but because of how close we had come to ending someone's life. It wasn't something I could just shake off. My brother and I continued walking back to the truck. The whole time, I kept thinking about that man, sitting there on top of the hill, completely unaware of how close he had come to being killed. We had almost made a tragic mistake, one that would have haunted both of us forever. And I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anger. Anger at that guy for being so careless, for putting himself in a position where he could have been killed just by being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't long before we got back to the truck, and when we did, we didn't waste any time leaving. The drive back was quiet. We didn't need to talk. We both knew what had almost happened, and there was nothing left to say. It was only when we got back to the house that the tension finally broke, when my brother finally let out a long, deep breath and looked at me. "You know, if I hadn't seen him move," he trailed off. There was a long pause. "That would have been it." I nodded. I didn't know what else to say. What could I say? I had just experienced the kind of near miss that would stick with me for the rest of my life. I didn't know what that man had been thinking, driving a snowmobile on someone else's land with a stupid fox hat on. But I would never forget how close my brother had come to taking his life. I think that moment changed both of us. We didn't hunt the same way after that. It wasn't about being sharp or perfect anymore. It was about realizing how fragile life really is, how easily things can go from calm to tragic in a split second. It was a lesson in how careful you have to be with every decision, every shot you take, and how you can never be too sure of what you're seeing. I'll never forget that day. And I'll never forget how lucky that man was. He might not know it, but he had a second chance. And my brother? He'll never forget how close he came to taking someone's life. It's a lesson neither of us would ever forget. A few years ago, I was home alone on a Friday night. It had been a long week, and I didn't have any big plans, so I decided to stay in. I was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket, flipping between channels and occasionally checking my phone. It was late, probably close to 11 p.m. The house was quiet aside from the low volume of the TV and the occasional creak of the walls settling or the hum of the fridge kicking on in the kitchen. I'd lived there long enough to know all the little sounds. They didn't bother me. I felt safe. The living room lights were on, but the rest of the house was mostly dark. Just how I liked it. My phone buzzed with a notification, and I picked it up without really thinking about it. I remember I was looking at something dumb, some meme or tweet, and chuckling to myself when I heard the doorbell ring. It wasn't loud. Our doorbell was one of those soft, old-fashioned ones. It gives off more of a chime than a buzz. Still, it caught me off guard. I immediately froze. The sound broke through the calm like a rock tossed into still water. My mind went blank for a second, just processing what I'd heard. Then the tension hit me. When you live alone, or when you're just alone in the house, you don't think too much about safety, until something snaps you out of that comfortable bubble. A doorbell at 11 p.m. on a quiet night is one of those things. It wasn't just unexpected, it felt wrong. I muted the TV and sat there in silence. I didn't get up right away. I just sat and listened, trying to hear if there were any other sounds. Footsteps on the porch, a voice, movement. Nothing. Dead quiet. That somehow made it worse. I finally stood up, moving slowly and quietly like I didn't want whoever was outside to hear me. I don't know why I did that. It's not like the floors were loud, but in that moment, every creak under my feet felt like a firecracker. I walked over to the front door, but stayed a few feet back. I didn't turn on the porch light. That was a habit of mine. Don't give away that someone's home if you don't have to. I preferred to keep them guessing. Our front door had a peephole. I remember I leaned in, pressed my eye up against it, and looked out. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. The porch light was off, and there wasn't much ambient light either, just some distant streetlights and a neighbor's dim porch light a few houses down. But I could see something. There was a shape standing on the porch. Small, low to the ground. At first I thought it might be a kid, but even that didn't make sense. Who brings a kid to someone's house this late at night? It was hard to make out details. It wasn't lit from the front, just barely outlined by the faint light in the distance. But it stood out because it was darker than everything else, more solid. Like an ink blot against a sheet of gray paper. And it was moving, not like pacing or walking. It was dancing, kind of. It would dip down, almost like it was crouching or bowing, then sway back up. Its arms, or at least the shapes on either side, would spread out and move gracefully like wings. The motion was weirdly fluid, like it had no joints. There was something deliberate and slow about it. Not fast or erratic. More like it was putting on a show. I remember just staring through the peephole, trying to figure out what I was looking at. I squinted, tilted my head, even moved slightly to try and get a better angle, but the thing was just too hard to make out. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't feel like I was in danger yet, but something about it made me deeply uncomfortable. It was like my body knew something was off before my brain caught up. After maybe 10 or 15 seconds, I backed away from the door. I couldn't look anymore. It just felt wrong. I remember my stomach dropping, like I was on a roller coaster, and I suddenly didn't want to be near the door at all. I stood in the hallway, a few feet back, trying to make sense of it. I didn't hear any footsteps. No voices. Nothing. A part of me wanted to just go back to the couch, pull the blanket over my head, and pretend it hadn't happened. But that curiosity, the kind that keeps you watching horror movies, even when you want to turn them off, pushed me to look again. I waited maybe another 20 seconds, then went back to the peephole. Gone. Whatever it wasn't there anymore. I opened the front door crack, just a crack, and looked out. I didn't step outside. My eyes scanned the yard, the sidewalk, even up and down the street. Nothing. Just night. Quiet. Still. I closed the door and locked it tight. I made sure the deadbolt was set. Then I turned on all the lights in the house. Every single one. Hallways, kitchen, bedrooms, even the bathroom. It made me feel less vulnerable, like light could keep whatever that was from coming back. I barely slept that night. I sat on the couch with the TV on, volume low, and kept checking my phone every few minutes. I didn't call anyone. I thought about it, but I didn't want to sound crazy. What would I even say? I kept playing it over in my head, trying to make sense of it. Could it have been a prank? A kid from the neighborhood playing around with a costume or puppet or something. But there weren't any kids who lived close by, and it didn't move like a person. It didn't even feel like something trying to scare me. It just moved like it was doing its own thing, like I wasn't even part of the equation. That was maybe the creepiest part. The next day, I checked the porch. I didn't expect to find anything, but I looked anyway. No footprints, no marks, nothing out of place. That whole weekend, I kept thinking about it. I avoided going out at night. I kept the porch light on. Every time I passed the front door, I'd glance out the window just to make sure nothing was there. But it never came back. After a while, I stopped thinking about it so much. Life moved on. Work, errands, normal stuff. But every now and then, it comes back to me. I'll be home alone at night, watching TV in the same spot on the couch, and I'll remember the way that thing moved. The way it dipped and swayed, like it was underwater or floating. I never told anyone until a year or so later. I brought it up to a friend in passing, just to see how it sounded out loud. They laughed, thought it was sleep deprivation or a trick of the light. And maybe it was. I've run through every explanation I could come up with. A kid in a costume? Weird time for it, and the motion was off. Someone trying to prank me? Seems unlikely, especially with no reaction, no follow-up, and no pattern. A trash bag or tarp blowing in the wind. No wind that night. No rustling. No sound at all. It moved with purpose. But I know what I saw. The shape was too dark and too consistent to be something like smoke or shadow. The way it moved, it haunts me. I wasn't scared in the sense of being in danger, but it stuck with me. There's a kind of fear that doesn't shout. It just sits there, quiet, like a weight on your chest that never quite lifts. Since then, I've changed how I live a little. I keep the porch light on more often. I check who's at the door through my phone now. I installed a camera. I got one of those motion sensor lights too. Nothing's ever triggered it in a weird way, but it helps me sleep better. I think about that night sometimes when it's late and quiet, when the wind's still and the world feels paused. I'll find myself looking out the peephole again, not because I heard anything, but because I'm making sure, just in case. Because the scariest part of that night wasn't what I saw. It was that it never came back. I don't know what it was, why it was there, or where it went. But I saw it. I know I did. And not knowing, that's what really stays with me. Even now, I can close my eyes and picture it perfectly. The dark shape dipping down, arms flowing out like wings, moving slowly and smoothly in the night. No noise, no reason, just that quiet, graceful motion like it was dancing to some music only it could hear. And then it was gone. It never came back. Nothing like it ever happened again. But I still check the peephole. I had never really thought much about my grandmother's house. It was old, really old. The kind of old that creaks at night when the wind blows through the cracks in the walls. Built in the late 1700s, it had stood the test of time, and that in itself was a bit eerie. But it was home, and for as long as I could remember, it had always been the place I returned to when life felt too fast, too cluttered, or just too much. My grandmother had lived there since she was a child, and now, as an adult, I would visit her when I needed to slow down, when I needed to remember what it felt like to be at peace. The house sat on a plot of land surrounded by graveyards, 2 of them on either side. Not old church graveyards, but private family cemeteries, weathered stone markers partially overtaken by moss and ivy. They were always there, standing in quiet testimony to the generations that had come and gone before me. The house itself was massive, with rooms that seemed endless, hallways that twisted in unexpected directions, and a staircase that creaked with every step. The floors were always a little chilly, and no matter how much we tried to warm the house, there was always an underlying draft that never seemed to go away. The smell of old wood and the faint scent of lavender or something herbal filled the air, but it wasn't unpleasant. In fact, it felt like home. One day, I received a call from a friend I hadn't seen in months. A guy I grew up with. Someone I hadn't spoken to since he'd gone away to a treatment program for drugs. When he came back into town, he reached out to me, and we agreed to meet at my grandmother's house. The old place was quiet, and I figured it would be a good place to catch up. I hadn't seen him in such a long time, and I wasn't sure what to expect. The last time I had seen him, he was in a bad place, his eyes hollow, his hands shaking, always on edge. But when he showed up at the door, it was like seeing a completely different person. He looked clear, almost, like a weight had been lifted from him. There was a certain calmness in his demeanor, a grounded presence I hadn't seen before. I couldn't quite explain it, but it felt like he was tuned in to something that the rest of us weren't. We decided to take a walk around the property, down the old cobblestone driveway that led from the house to the street. The driveway had been there for as long as I could remember, the stones worn smooth by decades of footfalls. We talked about life, about his time in treatment, about how he'd found a sense of spirituality, not through religion, but through a kind of cerebral awakening. He said it was like everything in the world was somehow connected, that he could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, like the trees, the wind, the air. Everything had a deeper meaning now. I didn't quite understand it all, but I believed him. Whatever had happened to him in those months, it had changed him, and it seemed like he was genuinely at peace now. As we walked and talked, my cat, an old calico named Momo, came over to us, winding between our legs as she often did. She was a curious thing, always rubbing against my ankles or hopping up onto the windowsills to watch the birds outside. But today, as she rubbed up against my leg, I noticed something a little off. She wouldn't stop. Usually, she'd just nudge me once or twice and move on. But now, she was insistent, purring louder than normal, pressing her body up against me. I brushed it off at first, thinking she was just being affectionate, but it was starting to feel a little strange. There was something about the way she was rubbing against me, like she was trying to communicate something. Maybe she just wants attention, I said, but I didn't feel like I was convincing myself. Momo had always been a bit of an oddball, but she wasn't usually this persistent. I took a few steps forward, thinking she'd stop, but she followed me, weaving between my legs again. Each time I slowed or stopped walking, she turned around and rubbed against me once more, like she was trying to guide me somewhere. This went on for a while, with me trying to walk in one direction and her persistently nudging me to keep going. I glanced over at my friend, unsure of what was going on, but he didn't seem bothered. In fact, he seemed oddly intrigued. He had been talking a lot about his heightened sensitivity to the world, to energy and things unseen, and I wondered if he was picking up on something I wasn't. Before I knew it, Momo had led me down the cobblestone driveway and toward the edge of the property. I hesitated, looking around at the graveyards on either side of the path. The air felt thick, heavier than usual, like a storm was rolling in, but there was no rain or wind, just an unsettling stillness that seemed to cling to the ground. I didn't know why, but I felt a shiver run down my spine. I looked at my friend, and he seemed unfazed, as though he was simply waiting to see what would happen next. We were nearing the entrance to one of the graveyards, the one closest to the house, when Momo darted ahead, moving with purpose. She wasn't just walking anymore. She was practically running toward the stone markers. I hesitated, but she stopped in front of a gravestone, sitting at the base of it and staring up at it intently. It was a simple stone, weathered by time, with faded letters I couldn't make out from this distance. But what was strange was the way Momo was acting. She was balancing herself on the narrow top of the gravestone, not moving, just sitting there perfectly still. I stepped closer, calling her name softly. "Momo, what are you doing?" But she didn't respond. Instead, her fur bristled, and I heard a low growl rumble in her throat, something I'd never heard before from her. I reached out to pull her down, but as soon as my fingers touched her, she hissed, arching her back and swatting at me. I jumped back in surprise, but she didn't move. She stayed there, perched on the gravestone, her eyes fixed on something beyond my reach, something I couldn't see. My friend, who had been standing a few steps behind me, came over cautiously, taking out his phone to snap a picture of the scene. He didn't say anything, just watched quietly as I stood there, unsure of what to do. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a strong sense of unease. It wasn't just the way Momo was acting. It was the entire situation, the way the air felt thicker, the way the silence of the graveyard pressed in on me. We both looked at the gravestone, then back at Momo, who refused to move. There was something about the way she was behaving that unsettled me. It wasn't normal. But what was even more unsettling was when I finally took a closer look at the inscription on the gravestone. The name on it was familiar. It was the name of someone who had lived in our house. My grandmother had mentioned him before, an ancestor who had passed away long before I was born, but someone whose presence still lingered in the family. "Do you think it's coincidence?" my friend asked quietly, breaking the silence. I wasn't sure what to think. All I knew was that this felt wrong. Momo was still hissing and growling, her body rigid, her eyes locked on the gravestone. I tried to coax her down, but she wouldn't budge. It felt like she was guarding it, as though there was something there she wanted to protect, or something she was afraid of. I didn't want to make a scene, but the atmosphere around us had grown heavy, suffocating. I could feel my pulse quicken, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. After a few minutes, I decided to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the whole situation. I gently pulled Momo off the gravestone, and to my surprise, she didn't resist as much as she had before. She followed me back toward the house, but she kept glancing over her shoulder as if she was watching something unseen. Later that night, my friend showed me the picture he had taken of Momo on the gravestone. When I looked at it, I noticed something strange. In the background of the photo, beyond Momo, there seemed to be a faint, almost imperceptible figure standing among the trees, just on the edge of the frame. It was hard to make out, almost like a shadow, but it was there. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. My friend looked at me with a raised eyebrow, but neither of us said anything. The moment passed, and we both decided it was best to leave the graveyard and go back inside. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The unease lingered, even after we were back in the warmth of the house. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was the heavy weight of history that seemed to hang in the air around the house. Or maybe it was something else, something that neither of us fully understood. The next morning, Momo was back to her usual self, acting as though nothing had happened. But I couldn't forget what we had witnessed. I couldn't shake the image of her on that gravestone, or the strange, uncomfortable feeling that had settled over me like a dark cloud. And as I stood there, looking out the window toward the graveyard, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the house, to the land, than I would ever truly understand. It was one of those summer nights where the air felt thick with heat, even after the sun had long since dipped below the horizon. I was around 13 or 14 years old at the time, just a kid who spent every summer night glued to the screen of a gaming console, binging on chips and soda. You know, the usual routine when the night felt too long and nothing else seemed worth doing. My grandparents' house had always been a place where I could kick back and escape from the usual chaos of daily life. It was one of those houses that always felt like it had 100 stories waiting to be told, even though it was just a simple two-story with old wooden floors and peeling wallpaper. But there was something strange about this house. Not necessarily creepy, but unsettling in a way that made you look over your shoulder more than once. It wasn't the house itself that was the issue. It was what happened in it. I don't know how they managed to always end up in places like this, but it seemed like my grandparents had a talent for finding homes that weren't exactly normal. And I don't mean that in a spooky paranormal, ghosts and goblins kind of way. It was the little things, like the odd creaks, whispers of movement in the corners of your vision, or sounds that made you second-guess what you just heard. Sometimes, it felt like the house had a life of its own. It was always like that. I always stayed up late when I was at their place, mostly because I could. I didn't have anyone to tell me it was time for bed. My grandparents were the type to go to bed early, long before I even considered putting the controller down. So I'd stay in my room at the very end of the hallway, feet propped up on the edge of the bed, a bowl of chips in one hand, and the other hand wrapped around the controller. The soft hum of the TV, the light flickering from the screen, it all felt normal to me. But there was always the sound of footsteps. The thing about that house was that you could hear everything. The sound of feet hitting the carpet as they made their way down the hallway was unmistakable. It was a pattern I'd gotten used to hearing over time. My grandpa would often get up in the middle of the night, probably to grab some Tums or check on something in the kitchen. It was the same rhythm every time. A few quick steps, a pause near the cupboard where the Tums were kept, then the shuffle back to the bedroom. Finally, you'd hear the bedroom door close quietly behind him. I could always tell when it was him. His footsteps were distinct, slow and steady, like a man who didn't want to make too much noise. Sometimes, I'd hear him stop in the hallway, maybe to look out the window or stretch his legs. I'd roll my eyes, hearing him get up at 2 a.m. to walk around the house when he probably didn't need to, but it was something I was used to. I wasn't disturbed by it. It was just the house's way of reminding me that I wasn't alone. But then, one night, something changed. I'd been awake like usual, mindlessly playing my game, when I heard it again, the sound of footsteps. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, my grandpa had a habit of getting up late for one reason or another. But this time, the footsteps seemed different. They weren't as deliberate as before. They were more hurried, like someone was rushing down the hallway. I heard them come closer, down the long stretch of carpet toward my room. At this point, I had gotten so used to the sound that I didn't even bother looking up from the TV. I figured it was him, maybe making his way to the bathroom or to the kitchen. But then, the footsteps stopped. Just stopped. I froze. Something wasn't right. I didn't hear the door to the bathroom open. There wasn't the usual shuffle of someone moving around. It was just quiet. I turned the volume down on the TV and listened hard, my heart picking up pace as I stared at the door. The silence stretched on for a few seconds, and then it happened. The sound of my door handle rattled. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It was as if someone was standing right on the other side, twisting the handle, trying to get in, but not actually opening the door. I shot out of bed, adrenaline surging through me. I wasn't sure what was going on, but my first thought was that my grandpa was messing with me. He had a knack for playing little pranks, and I'd been the target of more than one of them in the past. But this felt different. The rattling continued, faster now, like someone was trying to turn the handle over and over again, but still didn't quite know how to open the door. It was sharp and quick, not slow like my grandpa would usually be. I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to figure out what to do. Was it my grandpa, trying to scare me? Was someone else messing around? I quickly ran over to the door and flung it open, expecting to see him standing there with a mischievous grin on his face. But there was nothing. The hallway was empty, completely empty. I scanned the darkness of the hallway, but there was no one there. No sign of anyone, not even a sound. Just the still, quiet air that hung in the hallway like it had for years. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just imagining things. But something about the way the handle had rattled, so fast and with such intensity, didn't sit right with me. I stood there, the silence pressing down on me, and slowly, cautiously, I crept toward my grandparents' room. I knew what I was going to find, but I had to check. I pushed the door open, just a crack, and peeked inside. My grandpa was snoring, peacefully asleep in his bed, just like he always was. The house was still. No one had been out of their room. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. What had I heard? What had caused that noise? I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck, the hairs standing on end. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was unsettled. It didn't feel right. I went back to my room, shutting the door behind me and sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the darkness outside my window. The next few nights followed a similar pattern. I'd hear the footsteps in the hallway again, the same sound I had grown used to over the years. But now it was different. The footsteps came at odd hours. They would start out normal, but then they would stop in the middle of the hall. The rattling of the door handle would return, making my stomach churn each time. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the house settling. Maybe it was the old wood creaking in the night. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, I decided to stay up late and wait. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to hear or see, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was silent, the only sound the hum of my TV. I sat there, wide awake, listening to the stillness around me. And then, just as I had expected, the footsteps started again. Soft at first, then louder. They came closer and closer to my door, just like before. And then they stopped. This time, I didn't wait. I got up, moved quickly to the door, and threw it open. But again, there was nothing. Just the empty hallway, still and silent, as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing. What was going on? Why was this happening? I had no answer. But one thing was clear. The house wasn't the same. Something about it had shifted, and it wasn't the kind of shift that could be explained away. Whatever it was there, watching, waiting, and it wasn't going to stop. As the nights passed, the footsteps grew more frequent, and the rattling of the doorknob more insistent. But one thing had changed. I had stopped being afraid. I don't know why, but the more I heard it, the more I realized that whatever it was wasn't going to hurt me. It was just there, part of the house, and there was nothing I could do about it. Eventually, the footsteps stopped. The door handle stopped rattling. I never figured out what had been causing the sounds, but by that point, I didn't care anymore. The house had quieted down. It had gone back to being just a house again. But every once in a while, I'd still hear it, just faintly in the back of my mind, like a distant echo, the sound of footsteps in a hallway. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't forget it. The first year of college was supposed to be the start of an adventure. Everyone said it would be a time to make new friends, learn new things, and experience freedom for the first time. For the most part, it was. I had an amazing roommate, a small group of friends, and I felt like I was finally becoming who I wanted to be. Classes were hard, but I was getting by, and the social life in the dorms was everything I had hoped for. There were no major problems, no signs of anything unusual, just the normal ups and downs of college life. But as the semester began to draw to a close, something changed. It wasn't anything obvious at first. It was just a subtle shift, like a dark cloud that hovered over everything, but never seemed to fully touch down. It started with a strange feeling in the air as soon as you entered our hall. Everyone still talked and laughed like normal, but there was a heaviness that settled in the corners of the building. It wasn't something anyone could put a finger on, but it was there. A sense of dread that seemed to follow you around like a shadow, something that made you uneasy every time you walked down the hallway. Everyone brushed it off. Finals were coming up, and the stress of the exams was getting to all of us. We thought it was just the weight of upcoming deadlines creeping into our lives. I remember one night, about a week before finals, when I decided to hit the shower. I had been studying for hours, and my body felt stiff and sluggish. I figured a quick shower would wake me up and help me feel refreshed before class in a few hours. I don't know why, but that night felt different from the others. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Our dorm was set up like a prison block, if I'm being honest. The hallways were long and narrow, lined with heavy steel doors that led into each room. Each door had a small window, but it was too high up to look through, so you never knew who was behind the door unless you knocked. At the end of the hall was the bathroom, and across from it were the elevators that led down to the common areas. The bathroom was big, almost too big for the few people who used it, and the way it was arranged made it feel like you were always being watched. There were 2 sets of sinks, one on each side of the bathroom, and 2 massive mirrors that reflected everything in them. Looking into them was like stepping into a funhouse. If you stared for too long, everything felt distorted, like you were seeing a version of yourself that wasn't quite right. Behind the sinks were 2 urinals, a toilet stall on the left, and 2 showers on the right. The showers were separated by thick curtains, and if they were open, you could see the reflection of them in the mirrors. The door to the bathroom was a huge steel thing, just like the room doors, and it was propped open by a large wooden wedge. It was so heavy that it could only be moved with effort, and there was always a bit of a draft in the room because of it. That night, I was the only one in the bathroom. Everyone else was either in their rooms or out studying. I dropped my clothes on the sink by the showers, and as I glanced up into the mirror, I saw something strange. At first, I thought it was just the light playing tricks on me, or maybe I was still coming down off the energy of too many Red Bulls and caffeine pills. But the longer I stared, the more I realized something was moving in the reflection. There was a shimmer at the far end of the shower stall. It looked almost like a heat wave, but it was moving in a way that didn't make sense. I watched it for a few moments, not sure if my mind was playing tricks on me, but then it started getting closer. It wasn't like a normal movement. It was more like it was skipping forward, jumping from layer to layer of the mirror's reflection, getting closer and closer to me. The longer I watched it, the more unsettled I felt. I should have turned around and left, but for some reason I couldn't. I was frozen, caught between curiosity and fear. As it moved closer, I began to make out details, but they didn't make sense. The figure wasn't quite solid, but it wasn't transparent either. It looked like a dark mass of something, like a person covered in some kind of flowing veil. It wasn't hair, but it looked like it. I could see through parts of it, but the lower half was solid black, like a shadow that didn't belong. And the face, I'll never forget the face. It wasn't quite human, but it was. Its features were distorted, like something that had been twisted or bent out of shape. Its eyes, though, they were glowing black, like pits of darkness, but somehow they shimmered, and I couldn't look away. It was like it was staring straight at me, but it didn't have to move its head. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my head was spinning. I felt dizzy, like I was losing touch with reality. It was too close now, too close for comfort, and before I could make sense of what was happening, the lights went out. The whole bathroom plunged into darkness, and I couldn't see the figure anymore, but I could still feel it. It was there, somewhere in the dark, watching me. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and I could hear the heavy thud of it locking. My hand shot out to grab the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. My breath was coming in sharp gasps, and that's when the smell hit me. It was metallic, like the sharp tang of blood in the air. It filled my nose, overwhelming me, and I felt like I was going to suffocate under the weight of it. My body felt heavy, like I was being crushed from all sides. Then everything went black. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed. The room was sterile and bright, the smell of antiseptic in the air. My head was pounding, and I could feel the weight of something wrong pressing down on my chest. I tried to move, but everything felt off. I looked around, confused, and saw my parents standing by the bed, their faces pale with worry. I tried to speak, to ask what happened, but my throat felt dry, like I hadn't spoken in hours. It took a moment before I could gather enough strength to ask. What happened? How did I get here? My mom's voice trembled as she answered. You had a seizure. Your RA found you in the bathroom, covered in blood. He said you were saying something. He thought it was a nosebleed, but when he saw you, he called for help. I tried to remember, but everything was a blur. I don't remember a seizure," I muttered, more to myself than to anyone else. The doctors ran CAT scans on me, but they couldn't find any physical signs of a seizure. There were no traces of epilepsy or any other condition that would explain what happened. I had taken Adderall before, and I had never had any kind of reaction like this. I wasn't even on a high dose. The doctors couldn't explain it, and neither could I. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. For months after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I couldn't look into mirrors without feeling that same dread creeping up my spine. If I stood too long in front of one, I would feel like I was suffocating, like the thing I saw in the bathroom was still there, waiting for me. It was always in the reflection, just out of sight, but close enough that I could feel its presence. I went to therapy for years after that, trying to make sense of it, trying to get my life back. I talked to religious leaders, to people who had experienced things like this, but no one could help. They all just told me to turn to God or have faith, but nothing they said could explain what happened. There were no other reports of strange occurrences in that dorm, and after I left, nothing unusual happened again. It was just that one night, that one moment, and it stuck with me, a scar that would never fully heal. To this day, I can't look into a mirror for too long. I can't stand to be in a room where there's a mirror. Even if it's just for a few seconds, I feel that cold chill creeping up my spine, the same feeling I had in that bathroom. And when I think back to that night, to that thing in the mirror, I can't help but wonder, was it something I saw? Or was it something trying to make me see it? I don't know, but I'll never forget it. And I'll never be the same again. I grew up in a house in Brentwood, a small, quiet town on Long Island. It wasn't far from the city, but it felt worlds away from the hustle and bustle. My dad worked as a taxi driver, which meant he came home at odd hours. Most mornings, I'd wake up early, like around 6 a.m., and I'd run downstairs to greet him. My mom would still be asleep, probably getting some rest before she had to leave for work, and I'd always be excited to hear about his night, about the people he met, and the stories he'd share about the crazies he'd picked up during his shifts. One Saturday morning, the sun was barely up, and I was sitting in the living room watching cartoons. I wasn't expecting much for the day, just the usual weekend routine. My dad had just come through the door, and I jumped up from the couch, excited to see him. I always felt like I had to rush and say hi as soon as I could, even though he always seemed like he was still tired from the long nights. As soon as he stepped in, I ran over to him, and just like every other time, he scooped me up, a big smile on his face as he joked about something funny that happened on his last ride. But then, I heard my mom's voice. She was in the bedroom, and I could clearly hear her calling out, "Hello, honey, don't go in the pool. It's not ready yet." I froze. My dad froze. We both looked at each other, confused. My dad, still holding me, whispered, "Did she just say not to go in the pool?" I nodded, not sure what to make of it. It was 6 in the morning. Why would she be saying that? It was the middle of winter, and there was no way anyone was going near the pool. But then again, maybe she was still half asleep, or maybe we were just hearing things. My dad laughed it off and shrugged it off too. He told me about some of the strange passengers he had that night, the usual characters he picked up in his cab, but there was something about that moment that stuck with me. Something didn't sit right, but we both just brushed it off. Later that morning, when we realized it was Saturday, I realized that my mom was actually at work. She wasn't home, and it was just me and my dad in the house. That's when it hit me. There had been no mistake in hearing her voice. It sounded exactly like my mom, but there was no way she could have been there. We both just stood in the kitchen, looking at each other, not knowing what to say. But we said nothing more about it, and the day went on. Weeks later, we'd been living in the house for a little while, and it was still a strange place to get used to. The house was old, but comfortable enough, and the neighborhood seemed nice. One afternoon, the neighbors from next door came over to welcome us. There were 2 moms, 2 boys. One was my age and the other a bit older, probably in 10th grade, and 2 little girls. One of the girls had blonde hair, and the other was a shy brunette who didn't say much at all. At first, they seemed normal enough. The little blonde girl immediately ran into the backyard with me to kick around a soccer ball, and we started playing. But the shy brunette? She didn't seem to join in with the rest of us. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe she was just shy or didn't want to play. I didn't even notice that she wasn't around for a while until I looked up and realized she was gone. I remember calling out her name, but no one answered. I decided to go looking for her, not really sure why. I was just a curious kid, and I thought maybe she'd just wandered off somewhere on the property. The woods behind the house were dense, and even though they weren't far, they weren't a place a little kid should be exploring on her own. I walked around the edge of the woods, calling her name softly, and then I saw her. The little brunette was standing by a thick patch of trees, staring off into the distance. It was strange. She looked like she was in some sort of trance. I called her name again, and she turned around, her eyes wide, almost like she hadn't heard me approach. She didn't say anything, just stood there for a moment, and then asked me if I wanted to play tag. I thought it was odd, but I said no. It wasn't like I didn't want to play, but I wanted to get everyone else to join in. I was a kid, and the more people, the better the game, right? I ran back to the yard, where the others were still kicking the ball around, and asked them if they wanted to come play. The way everyone reacted made me uneasy. They all looked at me like I was speaking another language, and when I mentioned the little girl, the mom's face went pale. She stood there, blinking like she hadn't heard me right, before she finally said, "We only have one daughter." I remember looking at her, confused. I'd clearly seen two little girls, but she was insisting there was only one. I didn't know what to say. She gave me a strange look, but before anyone could say anything else, the older son spoke up, saying, "Yeah, didn't you know? A little girl drowned in that pool years ago." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Drowned? What the hell were they talking about? The mom didn't say anything more. She just shook her head and mumbled something under her breath. But then, the older boy explained that the little brunette girl I had been playing with had drowned in the pool about 10 years ago. She was just a child, and the whole family was devastated. The mother had never really recovered from it, and she passed away shortly after from a heart attack. The weight of what they were saying hit me all at once. I stood there, frozen. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Was it possible I had seen the girl they were talking about? Could it have been her, some kind of ghost, or... I didn't know what. But there was no logical explanation, no way to deny what had just happened. The rest of the days in that house felt different after that. It wasn't just the strange events that I couldn't explain, but the way the place felt, like there was something wrong with it. My dad, who usually had a calm and laid-back attitude, was a little on edge too. The stories he told started to change. He'd talk about his night shifts and the weird, eerie things he'd come across on his drives through the city, but it was like he was telling those stories to distract himself, to avoid thinking about what had happened in the house. I think we both knew deep down that the place wasn't what it seemed. The next few years felt like an endless series of strange occurrences. The pool, always the pool, became a constant source of anxiety. I avoided it for a while, even though I had no reason to. It wasn't until one summer evening when I was sitting by the back door, looking out into the yard, that I realized I hadn't heard the sound of water in ages. The pump had been running for days, but it had been so quiet. It made my skin crawl. I didn't go near the pool for weeks after that. And as for the stories, well, I could fill an entire book with what happened in that house. The creaking floors, the whispers when no one was around, the feeling of being watched, even when I was alone. But in the end, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The house had been sold, and we moved out. There was something about it that we just couldn't shake. Maybe it was the unsettling silence in the walls, or maybe it was just the overwhelming feeling that something had happened there that was never truly explained. Either way, I don't think I'll ever truly forget that house or the things I experienced there. Something stayed behind, something that I don't think will ever let go. I was only 4 or 5 years old when my parents separated. My mom and I had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment, and though I had my own room, I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I stayed with her. Our apartment was on the first floor of a nondescript building, the kind you'd barely glance at if you were walking down the street. The air felt thick with the heat of summer, and my mom kept the window in her room open to let in what little breeze could make its way through the city. My room and hers were at opposite ends of a narrow hallway. I can still picture the faint light filtering in from the street lamp outside, casting a dull glow across the hallway when the apartment was otherwise silent. The windowsill of my mom's room was right above the headboard of her bed, where we both would lie, usually nestled in blankets. It was a calm, quiet place during the daytime, but something about the stillness at night always made me uneasy, especially with the knowledge that things had changed so much. That night, I woke up in the middle of a dreamless sleep. The apartment was dark, except for the dim light that came through the open window. The silence was heavy, but it didn't seem like the usual calm I was used to. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves in the trees outside, and the sound of a distant car speeding down the road. It was summer, and there was that hot, humid air, the kind that wraps around your skin and doesn't let go. I remember sitting up in bed, rubbing my eyes, trying to adjust to the darkness. It took a moment before my eyes fully opened, and I could make out shapes in the room. The faint outline of the furniture, the shadows of the curtains swaying gently in the breeze. But there, just outside my mom's room, I saw something that stood out. Our cat, Whiskers, was sitting in the doorway of my mom's room. This was odd because he always slept in bed with us, curled up by our feet or nestled next to us. He was a chubby cat, one of those lazy kinds that never strayed far from home, even at night. But there he was, sitting in the doorway, staring into the darkness of the hallway like something had caught his attention. I blinked a few times, still half asleep, unsure whether I was imagining things. I watched as Whiskers stood up, his fluffy tail swishing slightly, and walked into my room, meowing softly as he came toward me. His steps were slow, deliberate, and I could feel the weight of his presence in the room. I turned my head toward my mom, instinctively wanting her to wake up. "Mom," I whispered, my voice hushed and small. It didn't take long for her to stir. Within a few seconds, she opened her eyes and asked what was wrong, her voice tired but concerned. I remember looking back toward the doorframe, thinking it was strange that Whiskers had walked into my room like that. But then, in the briefest instant, I saw something that froze my heart. A figure, a man, standing in the doorway. He wasn't facing us directly, but I could see the outline of his form against the dark hallway. He wasn't wearing anything that stood out, no clothes or features I could distinguish in that first instant. Just a vague shape, tall and broad, standing just beyond the doorframe. He was right outside my room, barely visible, but somehow unmistakably there. The seconds stretched on for what felt like forever. My mom, already alert, noticed my shift in expression. Her eyes quickly followed mine, landing on the same spot in the doorway. We both froze, and in that brief second, I could see her realization, the shock settling on her face. It wasn't a nightmare, it wasn't a hallucination. It was real. I don't know how she moved so quickly, but in that moment, my mom didn't hesitate. She grabbed me with a speed I didn't even know she had and lifted me out of bed. My heart was racing, and my chest felt tight. She didn't stop to ask questions or look around. Without saying a word, she threw me toward the window. It wasn't a high drop, just about 3 feet to the grass outside, but it felt like I was falling forever in that moment. I landed with a soft thud on the lawn. My knees scraped the ground, and my hands were immediately covered in dirt, but there was no time to worry about that. As soon as I hit the grass, I scrambled to my feet, looking back up at the window. I saw my mom following right behind me, her body moving with a sense of urgency I couldn't fully understand at the time. We both stood there, just outside the apartment, in the dark, adrenaline pumping through our veins. The fear didn't dissipate. It clung to me, and it seemed to swallow the night. My mom grabbed my hand, and we started running toward the front of the building, screaming for help. I remember the sound of my own voice, high-pitched and frantic, cutting through the night air. The building seemed so quiet at first, but as we screamed, the doors of other apartments started opening. People were coming out into the hallway, asking what was wrong, but we didn't have time for explanations. We kept running, pushing our way toward the nearest neighbors, still shouting. Someone finally heard us. A neighbor who had been walking their dog came to our aid and immediately called 911. I could hear the voice on the phone as my mom spoke frantically, describing the situation. Within minutes, the flashing lights of the police cars lit up the street, casting eerie shadows across the grass. When the police arrived, they didn't find any sign of forced entry. The front door was unlocked, and that was it. No signs of a break-in, no evidence of how the man had entered. My mom swore up and down that she had locked the door, with both the deadbolt and chain lock secured before we went to bed. She was adamant, and I could see the worry in her face as she explained it over and over again. The officers looked around the apartment, checking the windows and doors. But everything seemed fine, at least on the surface. They couldn't figure out how the man had gotten in or left. It didn't make sense. My mom wasn't one to forget to lock doors. She had always been meticulous about things like that. We stayed outside while the officers finished their investigation. After they left, I could feel the tension lingering in the air, the unease that wouldn't go away. We didn't sleep much that night. My mom tried to comfort me, but I could still feel the heaviness of what had happened. A few days later, my mom was cleaning the apartment. She had been tidying up the kitchen when she went to open the water heater closet in the hallway, a small, cramped space we didn't use often. She didn't expect to find anything out of the ordinary, but what she did find made her stop dead in her tracks. In the back corner of the closet, hidden behind some old cleaning supplies, was a notebook. It was a thin, worn book, and as she flipped through the pages, she realized it was filled with names and strange drawings, the kind of things a person would scribble in a notebook when they were trying to keep track of something. There were no dates, just random names and weird, almost childish sketches. On top of the notebook, there were a pair of gloves and a few crumpled gum wrappers. My mom immediately recognized them as something that didn't belong to us. There was no reason for them to be there. The police were called again, but this time, they could do nothing more than speculate. They couldn't find any fingerprints or DNA. They couldn't confirm who had left the items in the closet or how the man had been in our apartment without us noticing. The only thing they could do was guess. They said it seemed like the man had been in our house before, had been hiding somewhere, waiting for us to fall asleep. The weeks that followed were filled with unease. My mom locked the doors even more securely, double-checked every window, and kept the curtains closed every night. I was more alert too. I remember not being able to sleep properly for a long time, always keeping an eye on the door, wondering if someone would come back. But no one did. The apartment didn't feel the same after that. It wasn't just the fact that we had been violated in some way. It was the fact that we never truly knew who had been in our home, how they had gotten there, or why they had been watching us in the dark. We never saw the man again, and after a while, the fear started to fade. Life went on, and we moved out of that apartment eventually. But there are still moments when I think back to that night. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something deeper than just a random break-in. And I'm still not sure if I ever want to know the full truth. It was one of those rare afternoons where I had some free time, and I decided to tackle the laundry. It had been piling up for a while, and I knew if I didn't get it done soon, it would become an even bigger headache. The laundry room is in the basement, down a few steps and tucked away in the far corner of the house. It's not a terrible spot, but the basement is old, and I'd always found it a little unsettling. It's divided into two parts, one side where the laundry area is, and the other side is mostly storage, filled with old furniture and boxes. There's a door between the two parts, and to get upstairs, I have to walk through both sections of the basement. I'd been down there 100 times, but that day, something felt different. The light in the laundry room flickered for a moment, then buzzed and went out. At first, I thought it was just a bulb burning out, something that happens from time to time. But then I heard it, a strange sound from the other side of the basement. I could tell immediately that it was in the storage area, the darker part of the basement. The light over there was the only one on that side, and now it was out. The entire space beyond the door was pitch black. I couldn't help but feel a knot forming in my stomach. I tried to push the feeling down. It was just a blown light bulb, nothing more. I finished folding the laundry quickly, hoping to avoid lingering in the basement for too long. But of course, I still had to leave the laundry room and walk through the other side of the basement to get upstairs. The thought of walking through the dark part of the basement made my skin crawl. There's something about being in an unfamiliar space, especially one that's so close to home but still feels off. That does things to your mind. I grabbed the laundry basket, stood up, and took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. I crossed the threshold of the laundry room and stepped into the darkness. The cool air hit my skin, and I instinctively pulled my sweater tighter around me. The silence in the basement was heavy, almost suffocating. The usual sounds of the house seemed to disappear. My footsteps echoed off the walls as I moved deeper into the storage side of the basement, heading toward the stairs. The stairs leading up to the kitchen were just a short distance away, but every step felt like a mile. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides. Then, just as I was about halfway through the basement, I heard it. At first, it was just a soft noise, like something moving behind me. I stopped in my tracks and turned around, my heart racing. I couldn't see anything. The basement was completely black, no light at all. My pulse was pounding in my ears. The feeling of being watched crept up my spine, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Then, the sound came again. A laugh. It was deep and hollow, not like any laugh I had ever heard before. It was harsh, throaty, and cracked like someone had been smoking for decades, yet it echoed off the walls in the silence of the basement. It wasn't just a normal laugh either. It was an imitation, like the kind you hear in cartoons when someone tries to sound like a witch. But this one, it wasn't playful or exaggerated. It was low, guttural, and filled with something dark that made my stomach twist. The noise sent a shockwave of fear through me. The laugh was so close, so unmistakably behind me. I didn't need to look back to know that whatever had made that sound wasn't anything I wanted to meet. My heart skipped a beat, and the world seemed to close in around me. My instincts screamed at me to move, to run, to get out of that basement as fast as I could. Without thinking, I bolted. I turned and ran toward the stairs, clutching the laundry basket in my arms, the steps seeming to stretch further away with each stride. My mind raced, and my breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. I didn't dare look back. I just focused on the stairs, on the familiar wooden steps that led me to safety, to the light, to something that felt normal. I could still hear the sound echoing in my head as I reached the top of the stairs and slammed the door behind me, not stopping until I was safely in the kitchen, shaking, my heart still racing. I leaned against the counter, trying to catch my breath. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, feeling like my chest might burst, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that I had misunderstood the noise. But deep down, I knew that laugh had been real. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not then. Not after. I couldn't bring myself to say it aloud, even though the fear still gripped me whenever I thought about it. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The basement felt different now, like it was somehow off. I kept thinking about that laugh. The way it sounded. The way it felt. I couldn't explain why, but I knew it was more than just a malfunctioning light bulb. There was something else in that basement, something I hadn't noticed before. When my dad got home, I didn't mention it. I simply waited until he had a moment, and then told him that the light in the basement had blown out. I asked him if he could change the bulb. He agreed without question, and I followed him downstairs as he headed to the basement to take care of it. The walk through the basement felt different with someone else there. I stood near the bottom of the stairs, watching my dad climb the ladder to reach the light bulb. As he worked, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The air in the basement felt colder than I remembered. My skin was crawling, and my senses were on high alert. I kept my eyes on the darkness at the far end of the basement, half expecting to hear that laugh again, or worse, to see something move in the shadows. But nothing happened. My dad finished changing the bulb, and we left the basement without incident. The next few days were quiet. The light in the basement worked fine, and I didn't hear that laugh again. I went about my usual routine, trying to put it out of my mind, but the fear still lingered in the back of my thoughts. Every time I went downstairs, the silence of the basement felt a little too loud, like it was waiting for something. Something I didn't want to know. I never told anyone about the laugh. Not my dad, not my friends, and certainly not anyone who might brush it off as a simple electrical issue. There are some things you can't explain, things that don't make sense no matter how hard you try to reason with them, and some experiences you just don't share. I didn't want to sound crazy, and I didn't want to make it worse. Eventually, I stopped going into the basement by myself. I would wait until someone else was home, until I had company when I needed to go down there. I avoided the dark part of the basement entirely, not because I was afraid of what might be lurking, but because I knew I couldn't trust my mind anymore. The sounds, the feeling of being watched, the laugh, it all felt too real, too close, and I couldn't shake the fear that it might happen again. But one thing remained. I never heard that laugh again. Not once. It stayed silent, locked away in that dark corner of the basement, where it belonged. To this day, I've never told anyone about it. The others in the house still have no idea. But every time I go into that basement, I can't help but wonder what it was that I heard that day. And every time I turn off the lights, I listen carefully, half expecting that deep, cackling laugh to return from the shadows. I don't know how to explain it, but I can still remember how it felt. The way the hair on the back of my neck would stand up whenever the white SUV came around. It's a story I've tried to forget, but some things just stick with you. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I spent a lot of time with my older sister. She was 7 years older than me, and that made her seem like an adult in my eyes. Our parents would go out on their date nights or run errands, leaving my sister in charge of me. Back then, I was the annoying little brother who would follow her everywhere, bugging her while she tried to smoke outside, making it impossible for her to have any peace. The house we lived in was on a quiet street at the edge of town. Our driveway was long, with a carport at the end that faced the street. It was a quiet neighborhood, one of those places where everyone knew everyone else. Most days, there wasn't a lot of activity, but on those nights when my parents were out, things would change. And I guess that's when it all started. My sister would step outside to light up a cigarette, and I'd follow her, as I always did, hanging around while she tried to have a little time to herself. She would stand under the carport roof, puffing away, grumbling about how our parents wouldn't let her smoke inside. I'd sit on the edge of the driveway or kick at the gravel, making dumb noises to get her attention, just being a kid. Most of the time, she'd just ignore me, but there were moments when she would shoot me that tired. Not now, look. One evening, though, things felt different. I didn't know why at first. I was too young to understand what was going on, but I remember noticing it. A car, sitting at the end of our driveway. It wasn't unusual for cars to drive by, but this one just sat there, parked at the curb, not moving. It was a white SUV, maybe a mid-90s Bravada? I'm not sure about the exact model, but it had a bike rack on the top, and the windows were so tinted you couldn't see a thing inside. Not a single person, not a flicker of movement. The car just sat there. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe it was just someone lost or looking for directions. But my sister noticed it too. At first, she didn't say anything. She finished her smoke and went inside. The car sat there for a few more minutes, and then it slowly rolled down the street, turning the corner and disappearing out of sight. I shrugged it off, but my sister looked a little bothered. She didn't seem scared, but she seemed unsettled. The next night, the car was back. And this time, it wasn't just sitting there waiting. It followed the same pattern. The car would park at the end of the driveway, and when my sister went inside, it would drive down the road to the church parking lot. Then, once she came back out, it would return, only to park there again. I didn't think much of it, to be honest. But my sister started acting a little more cautious. She'd keep looking over her shoulder when she stepped out into the carport. I was too young to put it all together, but I could tell something wasn't right. I asked her once why she was so jumpy, but she brushed it off with a quick, "I'm fine, don't worry about it." Days turned into weeks, and the car kept coming back. It was almost like a game. At least, that's how I saw it. My sister would go out to smoke, and the car would show up, sitting there at the end of the driveway, just watching. It didn't make sense. Whoever was in that car wasn't just waiting for a parking spot or anything. It felt deliberate. It felt wrong. But my sister, as tough as she was, just ignored it, like it didn't matter. Things got worse when the car started showing up more regularly. It would sit at the end of the driveway, sometimes for hours at a time. At night, it would sit there in the dark, those blacked-out windows staring back at us. I know my sister started to feel it too, the unease, the way it felt like someone was watching us. I'd even watch from the window sometimes, just staring at the car, waiting for it to do something. But it never did. It just sat there, motionless. One afternoon, after weeks of this strange behavior, my sister finally decided to tell our dad. My father was a sheriff deputy, so he took things like this seriously. He called the cops, gave them the details, and the officers came over to look around. They even asked some of the neighbors if they'd seen anything. But when they arrived, the SUV was nowhere to be found. It was gone just like that. The cops told my sister not to worry. They said it could have been nothing, maybe just someone passing through. They didn't want to make it a bigger deal than it needed to be. But something about the whole situation nagged at her, and I could see it. My sister wasn't easily scared, but this was different. The weeks went by, and we didn't see the car again. At least, not at first. Then, about 4 or 5 months later, it was back. The same white SUV, with the dark windows, sitting at the end of the driveway. It was like nothing had changed. It would come, sit there for hours, and then leave. My sister didn't even bother calling the cops this time. She just stared at it, like she was trying to figure out what the hell was going on. But it was what happened next that really scared us. My sister, fed up with the whole thing, decided she was going to confront whoever was in that car. She told me to stay in the carport while she walked toward the SUV. I remember watching her go down the driveway, her footsteps heavy on the gravel. I stayed by the carport, my heart thumping in my chest, not sure what to do. My sister was a tough woman, always had been, but even from where I was standing, I could see the change in her. She looked uneasy. Halfway down the driveway, she stopped. It was like something hit her all at once. She turned around, walked back up the driveway, and came inside without saying a word. When I asked her what happened, she looked at me, her face pale, her eyes wide. I couldn't do it, she told me. I felt like if I went any further, I was going to die. I couldn't explain it. It was like pure terror. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. That night, things went quiet for a while. We didn't see the SUV for days. But then one evening, our family car was in the shop. My parents had been home for a while, and we were all stuck inside. My sister went out to smoke, as usual, and I followed her outside like always. It didn't take long before the SUV showed up. I didn't even need to look. I could hear the engine slowing down, turning onto the street. My sister, looking at me, told me to go inside and tell our dad. I ran into the house, my heart racing. My dad didn't ask questions. He grabbed his gun, checked to make sure it was loaded, and walked outside. He wasn't trying to be stealthy, but he was moving quickly. I could see him from the window, walking down the driveway toward the SUV. The car didn't move at first. It just sat there, the engine idling, the headlights dim. Then, without warning, the SUV suddenly revved its engine and floored it. Tires screeched as it peeled out of the driveway and shot down the road. My dad started running after it, but it was already gone, turning onto the highway, leaving only the smell of burnt rubber in the air. He stood there for a moment, watching it disappear, before turning back and walking toward the house. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was shaken. He had seen things in his job, but this felt different. He was a cop, used to seeing criminals and suspects, but this was something else. The most unsettling part? The license plate. It had been covered in duct tape. My dad made a note of the car's make, model, and the fact that the plate was obscured. After that night, we never saw the SUV again. My sister didn't talk much about it after that, and eventually, she shrugged it off, like it was just some weird coincidence. But I never forgot it. I don't think she did either, even though she tries to act like it was no big deal. I can't explain it. Maybe it was just some sicko looking to mess with us, maybe something worse. But I know this much. Whatever it was, we weren't supposed to know. And we were lucky we never found out what would have happened if we had. I was with my boyfriend at the time. We were just lying in my bed, the lights off, with nothing but the quiet hum of the night filling the room. We weren't talking, just laying there, each of us lost in our thoughts. I don't know how long we'd been like that, but it felt peaceful, like the kind of silence where your thoughts sort of swirl around, and everything in the world feels like it's at rest. My boyfriend, Jay, had his arm around me. His warmth felt familiar, comforting, like I could always count on it. He was always warm, almost too warm sometimes, which I never minded. But then, out of nowhere, something shifted. Jay rolled over and hugged me tightly. He didn't say anything, but there was this heaviness in his touch. Not physically, but emotionally, like he was holding me because he needed something from me. I didn't think much of it at first. I just hugged him back. But then, something strange happened. A coldness swept over me. It started small, like a soft chill creeping up my spine, and then suddenly it felt like it was rushing at me. If I wasn't already lying down, I think I would have fallen over. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread and panic. My heart started pounding, and it wasn't just the usual anxiety that I sometimes get. This was different. This felt wrong, like there was something else in the room with us. I tried to focus on Jay, on the warmth of his body, to ground myself, but it didn't help. His arms, which were usually so comforting, felt ice cold. I pressed into him harder, as if trying to force myself back into reality, but it didn't work. This was something beyond my control. The room felt thick, like the air was heavy, suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was coming from the corner of the room. It felt like something was standing there, watching us, waiting. I've had panic attacks before. A lot of them. I know what they feel like. They're terrible, but they're familiar. But this wasn't the same. This wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. This wasn't a physical response to stress. This was something else entirely. I could feel it in my chest, that pressure, that suffocating weight. My breathing became shallow, and my thoughts started racing. It felt like the room itself was closing in on me, like I couldn't escape it no matter what I did. The worst part, it wasn't just the coldness. It was the feeling that there was something in that corner, something dark, something evil. I've never believed in demons or anything like that. I'm not the kind of person who thinks there's a supernatural explanation for everything. But this, whatever this was, didn't feel human. It felt ancient, and it felt malicious. I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to say something. I turned to Jay, my voice barely a whisper. "Jay, do you feel that?" He didn't answer right away, and I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. But then he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I feel it. It's cold. It's wrong." That confirmation, hearing him say it out loud, sent a chill straight through me. I wasn't imagining things. Something was in the room with us. I don't know why, but Jay grabbed his phone and called his friend Matt. Matt was studying to be a youth pastor, and I guess in that moment, Jay thought he might be able to help. I didn't care. I just wanted to feel safe again. Jay put Matt on speakerphone and started explaining what was happening. I don't remember everything Jay said, but I could hear the panic in his voice, the urgency, like he was trying to make sense of this just like I was. I got up, my legs shaky, and turned on the light. The room didn't look any different, but it felt different. The light didn't chase away the feeling that something was in that corner, that something was watching us. I crawled back into bed, and Jay held the phone close to his ear. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the feeling, but I couldn't. Matt started praying. He spoke with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the fear swirling around me. I listened, praying silently in my head, repeating the words he said like a mantra. I don't know if it was the prayer or just the sound of his voice, but slowly, the air around me started to feel lighter. The coldness began to fade. It wasn't immediate, but it was there. I felt the heaviness lift, like something was pulling back, like the pressure in the room was loosening. When the prayer ended, the room felt almost normal. The coldness was gone, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. I let out a shaky sigh, not even realizing I'd been holding my breath until the relief hit me. Jay sat up, and I did the same. We both looked at each other, trying to process what had just happened. But then Matt asked something that sent my stomach dropping. "Were you two talking while I was praying?" he asked, his voice shaky. Jay and I exchanged a confused look. "No," I said, my voice hoarse. "We were just listening. We weren't saying anything." Matt didn't respond for a moment. When he finally did, his voice sounded distant, like he was processing something in his head. "I heard something," he said slowly. "It wasn't you, though." From the phone, I heard this deep, gravelly voice. It said, "Stop." And when I heard that, I felt it. I felt that same awful feeling, like something was pressing down on me. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. That same voice, that same feeling, had been there when we were in the room. It wasn't a mistake. I wasn't imagining it. Jay wasn't imagining it. Matt had felt it too. Jay didn't hesitate. He hung up the phone, and within minutes, he was grabbing his things and leaving. I didn't say anything. I didn't stop him, even though I wanted him to stay. I wanted him to stay so badly, to hold me, to keep the darkness away. But I didn't want him to be scared either. He was freaked out, and I knew it. The way he rushed out the door, the way he wouldn't even look back, it wasn't just fear. It was something deeper. I went to my dad's room, hoping that he would be able to comfort me. But when I knocked, he didn't even open his eyes. He just muttered something about a gun and said he'd shoot it if it came in the house. I stood there, staring at him in the dark, and then I realized that no one could really protect me from whatever had happened. I was alone. The thing that still haunts me, even now, is why. Why did it come? What was it trying to accomplish? I'll never know. I'll never have answers. It's like it was just there for a moment, a brief moment of pure terror, and then it was gone. It never came back. After that night, the room felt normal again. No more coldness, no more dread. But that question, why it came, stays with me. I don't think I'll ever get over that. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. I live in a small town, and in the heart of it is a Walmart. It's one of those places that you never really think much about until you need to go. For me, it's about a 10-minute walk from my place, which is convenient since I don't have a car. The walk usually takes me behind the store through a trail that runs along the back of the building. You know the type of area I'm talking about, the kind where you're right on the edge of civilization, but still just enough out of the way for it to feel isolated. There's a patch of woods all around, the kind of half-forest where the trees grow dense enough that they block the view of the road, and it can get pretty dark back there at night. I've walked that trail 100 times, and for the most part, it's harmless. But on one particular night, something happened that still freaks me out to this day. My boyfriend and I were heading to Walmart to get some stuff for root beer floats. It was just after dark, and it was one of those warm summer nights where everything feels a little too still. We were walking along the back of the store, heading toward the side where we would usually cut through the forest to get to the front entrance. It's the kind of place where the only sound you really hear is the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant hum of cars on the main road. But that night, as we walked, we spotted something up ahead, just off the trail. A black dog was sniffing around in the brush. It wasn't too strange at first. People let their dogs wander around all the time, especially in places like this, but something about it felt off. I think it was the way it was just standing there, motionless, in the dark. You know how dogs usually react when they see people? They'll wag their tails, maybe come up to you. But this dog just stood there, sniffing, its head slightly tilted like it was waiting for something. I made a joke to my boyfriend, trying to lighten the mood, something like, what if that's some sort of creature? Like some wild thing that's not even a dog. And right at that moment, the dog whirled its head around to look at us. We froze. I can't even explain it properly. Its eyes were like dark pits, and when it turned to face us, it wasn't the casual, friendly gaze you'd expect from a dog. There was something cold and empty in the way it looked at us, like it wasn't fully there. Then, without a sound, it took off, but not like a regular dog running. This thing tore off into the darkness at a speed I've never seen a dog run before. It was like the thing was moving faster than anything natural. Its legs were a blur, and it was gone in an instant. My first instinct was to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was the kind of run you'd expect from something, unnatural, almost like it was moving faster than the world around it could keep up. We got to Walmart without saying much more about it. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a dog that had a burst of energy or something, but that feeling never really left me. A couple of months later, I ran into my neighbor, and she told me something that made my blood run cold. She and her son had been walking around the back of Walmart one evening, and they saw a black dog wandering around the edge of the woods. It was around the same time of day, dusk, when it's getting dark, but not fully night yet. She said it had a strange presence, like it wasn't just a dog. She said it looked more like a shadow than anything, but she didn't think much of it at first. Then, just like that, the dog had turned to look at them. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. It had run off with the same kind of speed, almost inhuman, like it was just a blur that disappeared into the trees. My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything at the time, but I couldn't help but think back to the night my boyfriend and I had seen that dog. But, I tried to dismiss it again. Maybe it was just coincidence, right? Maybe it was just another dog, running off into the woods for some reason. A few weeks after that, my boyfriend came home one night looking a little off. He looked like he'd just run a marathon, his breath still a little heavy. I asked him what happened, and that's when he told me he'd seen the dog again. This time, he was walking down the same trail, heading toward Walmart. It had been dark, but not too dark. He said he didn't notice the dog at first, but when he did, it was standing at the edge of the trees, just like last time. It was the same black shape, with eyes that felt like they were staring right through him. He said it didn't look like a dog at all. It wasn't just black like a normal dog. It was black in a way that made the shadows around it look lighter. It was like a void, a gap in the world that just happened to be shaped like a dog. And when it turned to face him, he said it felt wrong, like it didn't belong. Then, just like before, the dog bolted. But this time, my boyfriend said it was even faster. He was still thinking about it when he came home, and he had that look in his eyes, like he couldn't shake it off. He told me he didn't want to walk down that trail alone anymore. And I understood, because something about that dog, about how it moved and how it felt, just didn't make sense. After that, things started to get weird. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started hearing more and more stories about people seeing a strange black dog roaming around the back of Walmart. One person said they saw it running along the edge of the parking lot. Another said they had seen it standing in the woods near the trail, staring out like it was waiting for something. But it was always the same thing. When the dog noticed them, it would disappear at a speed that made no sense. And then it hit me. This wasn't just a coincidence. This thing, whatever it was, had been in the area for a while. Maybe it was something that had always been there, and we just never noticed it before. Maybe it was something that had always been around the edge of the woods, waiting, watching. It didn't belong in the world we knew. It wasn't like any dog I'd ever seen. It wasn't like anything that belonged in the world I thought I understood. The last time I saw it, I wasn't even on the trail. I was walking back from Walmart by myself, the sun already down, the only light coming from the store's glow in the distance. I was near the side of the building when I saw it. The black shape, standing in the edge of the forest, just out of the reach of the light. It was like it was waiting for something. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just walked faster, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. I don't know what that thing is. I don't know if it's just a weird dog or something else entirely. But I do know that every time I see it or think about it, it feels like something is wrong. And I don't think it's just a coincidence anymore. That dog, it's not a dog at all. It's something else. Something that's been hiding in the shadows for a long time. I don't walk that trail anymore. I'll take the long way around the parking lot. I'll drive if I have to. Because whatever that thing is, I'm not going to be around when it decides to show up again. I remember that summer heat pressing into the house like it wanted to seep through my skin. The kind that sticks to you, makes the air feel heavier. I was only a few weeks out of high school, that strange limbo where you're supposed to be figuring out your next step, and everything feels both infinite and hollow. My plan was to sleep in. It was a small comfort, but when you're 18 and unsure what the hell you're doing next, sleeping till noon feels like a small victory. That morning I woke up before the sun hit the window. Something didn't feel right. Not a noise, not a smell, just a deep, awful silence. I'd slept on a thin mattress on the floor of my bedroom, just like always. No fan, just a cracked window and the buzz of insects from the backyard. But this time the quiet felt like it was holding its breath. My heart was beating in a way I didn't like. A rhythm that told me something had happened, even though I didn't know what yet. I got up slowly, confused why I even felt like I needed to. My body moved before my mind caught up. I stepped into the hallway. The carpet was cool under my feet. I remember looking at the front door, slightly ajar, a sliver of early morning light cutting into the living room carpet. I walked toward it without thinking. It wasn't until I reached the hallway arch that I saw him. My dad was lying on the floor, half curled, his head tilted slightly to the side. At first I thought he was sleeping. It didn't make sense. Why would he be there? I called out, I think. Maybe I didn't. I can't remember. Everything was heavy and dreamlike. I walked over and kneeled down. His skin was cold. His chest didn't rise. His lips were slightly parted and his eyes weren't open, but they weren't closed either. It was like something in him had been halfway through a thought and just stopped. I think I tried CPR. I know I pushed on his chest. I remember counting under my breath. I remember my arms shaking, slipping on sweat, or maybe something else. His ribs didn't move the way they should have. The more I pressed, the more I knew it wasn't helping. I didn't even call for help right away. It took a few minutes for my brain to realize that no one was coming, that this was real, that my father, who I had spoken to the night before, who had sat in that exact same spot watching TV, was gone. After that, it was like my life cracked down the middle. There was before that morning, and then there was everything after. For the first few days, I went through the motions. Family came. People hugged me and asked me if I needed anything. I said I'm okay, more times than I can count, even though I was nowhere near okay. The house felt different. The air smelled different. Every time I walked through the hallway, I saw that sliver of light again, even though the door stayed closed now. My brain wouldn't let me forget it. It didn't take long for the dreams to start. At first, they were hazy, just a sense of something wrong, like hearing the TV on, but not knowing what channel. Then they got clearer. In the dreams, I would wake up, same as I had that morning. Same warm air. Same silence. Same pull in my chest that told me to get up. I would walk down the hallway, feel the cool carpet under my feet. I'd see the door ajar, and that terrible light cutting into the room. Then, just before I looked into the living room, I'd realize what was about to happen. That moment between knowing and seeing was unbearable. In the dreams, I'd start screaming. Not yelling. Screaming. A deep, animal scream that clawed its way out of my chest. Sometimes I'd fall to the floor. Sometimes I'd turn and try to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Sometimes I'd wake up just from the sound of my own scream echoing in my skull. Every time I woke up, my heart would be hammering like I'd been running for hours. My shirt would be soaked through. My hands clenched so hard they'd ache. This went on for months. I stopped sleeping. At first I tried staying up just one night, then 2, then 3. I'd sit in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, then another, then an energy drink. The TV would play old VHS tapes of things I didn't care about. The goal was simple: don't sleep. Because sleep meant seeing it again. I started to break down slowly. I couldn't focus on conversations. I forgot simple things. I would lose track of time, find myself standing in a room with no idea why I was there. I stopped answering the phone. I didn't leave the house unless I had to. My girlfriend, now my wife, moved in with me around that time. She thought maybe if she was there, I'd sleep better. I didn't, but she stayed anyway. She never gave up on me. Then came the day that everything finally snapped. I'd been up for almost 4 days. I was in the kitchen. I think I was trying to make toast, but I couldn't remember how long the bread had been in the freezer. The sunlight hit the counter in a way that reminded me of that morning. The shape of it. I froze. My whole body tensed. The room started to spin. My ears rang like someone had fired a gun next to my head. Then it hit me. That same walk. That same feeling. Only this time I couldn't wake up. According to my wife, my body went rigid. She thought I was having a seizure. She said I stood there for nearly an hour, not blinking, not moving, except for a kind of slow shaking. But in my head, I was walking that hallway over and over again. The carpet underfoot, the door half open, the sunlight spilling through. Over and over again. I wouldn't go into the living room. I knew what was there. I would scream, stop myself, start over. Walk the hallway again. I didn't want to see him. Not again. And then something changed. I don't know what it was. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe something deeper. But at some point, I walked the hallway one last time, and instead of screaming, I kept walking. I let myself see it. Let myself relive it. His body. The quiet. The cold. I saw it, and something in me cracked apart and emptied out. Like a long scream that finally ends. When I came back to the real world, I collapsed. I think I passed out. But when I woke up again, something was different. The dreams didn't come back. I still didn't sleep well, not for a while. But when I did, it was dreamless. I started seeing a therapist. Started taking care of myself again. It took a long time, but I got better. Not fixed, not cured, just better. Enough to live again. Enough to make plans. Enough to join the army. When I deployed to Iraq, I thought I was prepared. I'd been through something already. I'd seen death. I thought that gave me some sort of edge. Maybe I was right. Maybe I wasn't. War has a way of digging into the corners of your mind and finding things you didn't know were hiding. We were running convoys across dusty, narrow roads, sometimes paved, sometimes not. The heat was brutal, the kind that cooks you from the inside. Everything was sand, metal, oil, and fear. You learned to live with tension, with the idea that around the next corner, someone might be waiting to kill you, that the road under your tires might not be solid. You get used to the adrenaline, like it's background noise. One day we got intel. Children were being used to stop convoys. A kid would run into the road, make the lead vehicle stop. Then ambush. Explosives. Gunfire. Chaos. The order came down clear. Don't stop. If anyone, man, woman, child, gets in the way, you drive through. That sat in my chest like a stone. We were moving out one afternoon. I was driving the lead vehicle. The radio was alive with static and chatter. I could smell the sweat in my helmet, the grit in my teeth. We moved through a small village, slowed slightly, then picked up speed as we hit the open road. That's when I saw him. A boy, maybe 10, maybe 12, standing about 300 meters ahead, then suddenly sprinting into the center of the road. He looked small and fast and stupid and brave. I froze. My hands clenched on the wheel. My eyes locked on him. My brain shut down. The road stretched out in front of me like a tunnel. My truck chief screamed at me to floor it. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Just stared. Then, at the last second, I did it. I slammed the gas. We barreled forward. The boy jumped out of the way at the very last moment. My heart didn't come back until we hit the next FOB. I couldn't shake it. The idea of what almost happened. Of what could have happened. of what might happen next time. That night, I tried to sleep. I drifted off, bone-deep exhausted, but I felt it coming. That darkness, that awful knowing. In the dream, I was driving again. Same road, same light, same heat. I saw the boy. This time, I didn't hesitate. I hit him. The truck jolted. I heard the thud, felt the tire bounce over him. I stopped the vehicle and got out. In the dream, I wasn't crying. I wasn't horrified. I was calm, too calm. That scared me more than anything. I walked to the back of the truck. The dread in my stomach was familiar. I knew it too well. And suddenly I knew. Somehow my brain remembered. This wasn't just a new nightmare. It was that nightmare. The one from years before. The hallway. The carpet. The moment before you see it. I tried to stop myself. I screamed. I dug my heels into the sand. But I couldn't stop walking. I came around the truck, and there he was. My dad. Dead. Same position. Same eyes. Same everything. I started screaming. But this time, I woke up in motion. I was running. Full sprint. My legs were moving before I woke up. My breath tore out of my throat. My heart thundered. I didn't know where I was. Some corner of the FOB. Storage containers. Dirt and barbed wire. The moon overhead. I stopped, bent over, hands on knees, coughing, shaking. I stayed like that for a long time. That was the last time I had that dream. Since then, I've had good years. Bad ones too. I still don't sleep. It was sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. I was around 6 or 7 years old enough to remember things, but still small, still very much a kid. We lived in a small Texas town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where people waved as they drove past, where your neighbors knew what kind of cereal you liked just from years of conversation at the grocery store. It was safe, or at least we thought it was. My parents let my sister babysit me all the time. She was about 15 then, almost 10 years older than me, and we got along surprisingly well. She wasn't the kind of teenager who thought her little brother was a burden. We had our own rhythm, she was patient with me, and I always thought she was cool. I liked being around her, especially when our parents went out, and it was just us. It was winter. I remember that part clearly because it was already dark by around 8 p.m., and the cold had really settled in. The desert in winter has this strange chill. It doesn't snow, at least not where we were, but the cold feels sharp, dry, and it gets deep into your clothes if you're not layered up. That night, we were in the common room, which was what we called the main living space. It was one big open area with a couch, a couple of recliners, a big coffee table, and the TV mounted on a short cabinet. The room had 2 points of access. On one end was the front door with a small foyer, just a few square feet before you stepped onto the rug. It was a solid wooden door with a glass storm door outside of it. On the opposite wall, the back wall, was a full row of floor-to-ceiling windows and a large glass sliding door right in the middle. If the back porch light wasn't on, and it wasn't that night, all you saw was your own reflection. It was just black beyond the glass. We were watching one of those news shows, 60 Minutes or 48 Hours, maybe hard copy. They all kind of blended together, those gritty investigative shows that felt like documentaries, always about crime, murder, kidnappings, drugs, trafficking. I think that night the episode was about a guy who had gone berserk and killed his next-door neighbors, mutilated the family, and taken their young daughter. They were in the middle of the segment, showing crime scene photos, blurry ones with things blurred out, and talking about the manhunt. It had that eerie narration, slow and deliberate, meant to keep you hooked. I remember being completely still, sitting cross-legged on the rug, my eyes fixed on the screen. My sister was on the couch, legs pulled up under her, eating cereal out of the box. The room wasn't very bright. We had the kitchen light on down the hall behind us, which cast a soft yellow glow, but everything else was dark. The TV was the brightest thing in the room. That was normal for us. We didn't like having every light on. It made the house feel too empty somehow. It must have been about 45 minutes into the show, right when they were talking about how the killer had managed to hide in plain sight for months before the rampage, how he'd lived next door, waved at neighbors, helped carry groceries. That's when the front door exploded with sound. Bam, bam, bam. 3 or 4 hard knocks, not just knocks, pounds like someone hitting the door with the side of a fist. It was so loud and so sudden that my heart felt like it leapt out of my chest. I screamed without even realizing I was screaming. My sister jumped to her feet, cereal flying everywhere, and yelled, though I don't remember what it sounded like. The pounding stopped just as suddenly as it started. We both stood there in the middle of the room, frozen. The silence afterward was heavy. You could hear the hum of the fridge from the kitchen and the faint ticking of the wall clock, which somehow made everything worse. It wasn't just silence. It was like the air itself was holding its breath. The front door didn't have a window. It was solid wood. We couldn't see anything on the other side. There was the storm door, sure, the glass one, but we couldn't see through it from where we stood. You had to be right up on it to see anything. We didn't move. We just stood there, eyes wide, hearts pounding so loud in our chests it felt like they echoed. At first, we tried to calm ourselves down. Maybe something fell on the porch. Maybe it was just the wind. West Texas winds were no joke. They'd whip through the open land and throw everything around. Chairs, branches, even trash cans. Maybe a planter fell over. That's what we told ourselves. We whispered it to each other without speaking, just in our heads, hoping. But then, after a minute, maybe two, we heard the storm door creak. The unmistakable metal and glass sound of it opening, and then closing. Not slamming shut like the wind caught it. Not banging open and rattling against the siding. Just a slow creak and a soft thunk. Like someone had opened it, knocked, waited, then slowly let it fall back into place. We didn't move. We didn't say anything. My sister slowly crouched back down and reached for the TV. She turned the dial. It clicked off with a loud metallic thunk. One of those old TVs, big and boxy with that silver ring dial you had to twist until it clacked off. The silence after the TV was gone was deeper than before. The flickering light that had been bouncing off the windows disappeared, and now the only light was that faint kitchen glow, casting long shadows into the room. Everything felt like it was sinking in on us. The walls, the silence, the cold. Neither of us spoke. We were both sitting again, still as statues. She was crouched beside the TV stand, hands pressed into the carpet, eyes locked on the front door. I was on my knees, my legs folded under me, hands in my lap, looking at her, then the front door, then the darkened windows behind me. I turned around. Something told me to look. I don't know why, but I turned my head and looked back toward the glass sliding door. And I saw it, the knob turning. Slowly, quietly, not forcefully. It was locked, just the knob, not the deadbolt, but the handle still turned as far as it could before catching. A slow metal scrape and a gentle clunk. Someone was trying the door. I didn't say anything. My breath caught in my throat. I stared wide-eyed. I could see my reflection in the glass, the faint outline of a boy sitting on his knees, and that reflection shifted slightly with each tug on the door, like the glass itself was breathing. The whole window wall trembled faintly with each motion. Then it changed. The gentle rattle turned into jerks. Hard, fast, loud shaking. The glass door shook violently, banging back and forth in its track, the windows around it vibrating. The metal of the door frame groaned under the strain. It sounded like someone was trying to rip it open. Not pry it, not sneak in, just force it open with sheer strength. I didn't move. I couldn't. My whole body locked up. My sister screamed, loud and raw. I barely heard it. My ears were ringing from the pounding noise. She grabbed me and yanked me up, dragging me across the room by my arm. I stumbled, my legs rubbery and slow. She half carried me down the hall and into her bedroom. She slammed the door shut and started shoving everything she could in front of it. Her mattress, a dresser drawer, a laundry basket. I curled up on the floor next to her bed and couldn't stop shaking. My hands were in fists, nails digging into my palms. She had grabbed the phone. I don't know when, but she had it. One of those beige cordless ones with the long antenna that always got caught on stuff. I saw her holding it, breathing hard, punching buttons. I think she forgot the number for the sheriff's department. We didn't have 911 back then in our county. You had to know the direct line. In a panic, she just hit redial. I didn't know who it was. I didn't care. I just wanted someone else to know what was happening. Anyone. She was sobbing into the phone, gasping and trying to talk. I couldn't make out the words. I just remember her swearing, something she never did around me. It stuck in my head because I had never heard her say those words like that, so loud and desperate. We stayed in that room, me curled up on the floor, her crouched behind the barricade she'd made. The only light now was from the hallway, still lit by the kitchen, casting a thin line of yellow under the door. We stared at it, waiting to see a shadow, waiting for the sound of someone trying the doorknob, but it never came. We didn't hear anything else. No footsteps. No glass breaking. No voices. Just silence. Then, after what felt like an hour, we saw headlights. A pair of car beams sweeping across the windows from the front of the house. We heard tires on gravel. Then doors opening. Voices. Fast steps up to the porch. It was her friend and her friend's parents. They had driven over as soon as she called. We ran to the front door when we heard them yelling our names, and my sister flung it open. The porch was empty except for the three of them. No one else. No signs of anyone running off. They checked the backyard too, walked the whole perimeter. Nothing. Just the cold desert night. There were no broken windows. No forced locks. The back door had a couple of scuff marks near the bottom, like maybe a boot had kicked it or someone had dragged their foot across it, but we weren't sure if they were new. Nothing else was touched. Nothing missing. Nothing moved. The sheriff came later. We told him everything. He took notes and said it might have been a prank, maybe someone passing through town, maybe someone trying doors just to see if anything was open. But we never found out. There was no real investigation. Nothing else happened. But we never forgot. I still think about it, even now. I remember how the door handle moved on its own, how the glass shook, how it felt like someone was just on the other side of that thin layer, trying to come in while we sat there watching crime shows like nothing could touch us. After that night, we locked everything. Every door, every window. My sister even started putting chairs under doorknobs when our parents weren't home. And we stopped watching those shows at night. Too many shadows. Too many ideas. I never saw whoever it was. Neither did my sister. I live in a quiet neighborhood. The kind where lawns are kept short, dogs bark at the mailman, and nobody really talks to each other unless they have to. For years, there's been this house right next to mine. Same layout as mine, same yard size, just frozen. Like someone hit pause on it a long time ago. The curtains never moved. The grass grew wild until the HOA stepped in every summer to have someone cut it. Paint peeled, roof mossed over, but the windows were always intact. Like it was just waiting. The story around here was that the guy who owned it moved to California 25 years ago. No one knew why he didn't sell it. Some said it was tied up in legal stuff. Others said he was rich and just didn't care. Whatever the reason, the place sat there untouched, collecting time and dust and everyone's curiosity. Mine too. It really started bugging me this past winter. I work from home, and I stare out the window a lot. Every time I looked at that place, it was like it was staring back. Something about it didn't feel right. I guess that's why I eventually convinced myself to go in. I waited until the snow melted and the trees started to bud again, so I wouldn't leave footprints in case someone decided to report me. Not that anyone cared. I got some gloves, a flashlight, a hoodie, and waited for a day when everyone else was gone or busy. Then I slipped around to the side yard where the bushes had long since swallowed the path. The back door was locked, but one of the windows near the kitchen was loose. Real loose, like someone had opened it before. I put on my gloves and shoved it up. It groaned, but it gave. Dust exploded out of the gap, and I coughed hard into my sleeve. I looked around once more, then hoisted myself through the window and into the house. I landed in what must have been the dining room. Old wood floors, mostly clean but with a thin film of grime, like no one had walked on them in years. There were dead bugs near the baseboards, spider webs in the corners, and a sour, musty smell in the air. That smell of time, moisture, and things that should have been thrown out long ago. The place was packed, not in a hoarder kind of way, but like someone had just gotten up one day and left without packing. Chairs still around the dining table, a coat draped over one, shoes by the door, an ashtray on the table with a cigarette still in it, long since burned down to ash. It felt like walking into a museum of a life no one wanted anymore. I wanted to explore the upstairs, but something made me head for the basement first. Curiosity, I guess. I found the door in the kitchen. The handle was cold and rusted, but it turned easily. I opened it and shined the flashlight down the stairs. It was steep and narrow, the kind of staircase where you have to hold the railing or you'll fall. The air was colder down there. Not freezing, but definitely cooler than upstairs. I started down, slow and careful, my boots creaking on the steps. At the bottom, I swept the light around. That's when I realized the place was way more than just abandoned. It was a time capsule. There was a grand piano against one wall. Dusty, keys yellowed, but not broken. I pressed one key, and it let out a soft, haunting note. Definitely out of tune. I hit a few more, and the sound echoed around the room like a dying thing. It gave me chills, but not in a haunted way. More like I had just woken something up that hadn't been touched in decades. There were shelves covered in old books and sheet music. A stack of yellowing newspapers in the corner, all dated around 1999. A coat rack held a moth-eaten trench coat and a hat. In one corner, a busted frame with a wedding photo inside. The glass was cracked, and the picture was sun-bleached, but I could still make out the couple. They looked happy, young. I wondered if that was the guy who left. I wondered what happened to her. But what really caught my eye was the stuff stacked near the far wall. Old military gear, helmets, gas masks, a footlocker stamped with U.S. Army, and a name I couldn't quite read. I opened it, and inside were medals, patches, a weathered journal, and even a faded ration pack. It smelled like old paper and iron. Whoever lived here had a history, a real one, and it was just sitting here like trash. And then there was the Elvis poster, tacked to the concrete wall with rusted pushpins, signed in blue ink right across the chest. I couldn't tell if it was real, but it looked legit. Next to it, shelves full of records, tapes, even some old 8-tracks. It was like this guy had a whole life that no one knew about, buried in his basement. There were instruments everywhere. Guitars, a saxophone case, even a trumpet sitting on a stool. Dust covered everything, but it wasn't random. It felt like someone had been working on something, maybe music, maybe writing, and just walked away mid-project. I spent maybe 30 minutes just going through stuff. Not taking anything, just looking. It felt wrong to touch too much, like I was snooping through someone's soul. But I couldn't stop. It was like trying to put together a puzzle with no box cover. Who was this guy? Why did he leave? I made my way back upstairs slowly. My boots left faint marks in the dust on the stairs, and I noticed there were no other footprints. No animal tracks, nothing. It was undisturbed. On the main floor, I went through the kitchen. The fridge was still plugged in, humming. That caught me off guard. I opened it and gagged. Mold covered everything inside. Old food, beer bottles with thick sludge at the bottom, plastic containers with unrecognizable gunk inside. The smell was like someone had bottled sickness and let it ferment. The stovetop had a pot still sitting on one of the burners. The food inside was black, hardened, and crusted to the metal. It looked like someone had just stopped cooking mid-meal. Beer cans on the counter, all half full and sealed in place with grime. The lights in the kitchen were on, faintly buzzing, yellowed with age. I tried the switch and they turned off. I flipped it again. Back on. The electricity still worked. That unsettled me more than anything. I don't know why. The living room was untouched too. Couch with flattened cushions, TV still there, an old one with a built-in VCR. Tapes stacked on a shelf. I looked at a few, home recordings, sports games, some old sitcoms. There were ashtrays everywhere. This guy must have been a heavy smoker. I wandered toward the stairs. I don't know why I kept going. Maybe I was looking for something to make it all make sense. The upstairs felt heavier somehow. Each step creaked under my weight, and the air grew warmer and closer. The hallway at the top was narrow, with doors on either side. Carpeted, dust thick in the corners. The first room on the left had an unmade bed. Sheets twisted, pillow darkened with age. A dresser with a cracked mirror, combs still on top. A closet door slightly open. I peeked in, just clothes old and brittle. Some still on hangers. The kind of stuff you'd see in a thrift shop, but never think about who used to wear it. The second room had more furniture. Bookshelves, some kind of home office setup with an old beige computer and a floppy disk drive. The monitor was off, and I didn't dare turn it on. There were papers all over the desk, some with handwriting, others typed. I glanced at a few. Letters never sent, song lyrics maybe, some journal entries. One caught my eye. It said something like, asterisk, sometimes I still hear her crying at night. I know it's just my head, but I hear it anyway. Asterisk. I backed away from the desk after that. That's when I heard it. Crying. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet, muffled sobbing. Like someone trying to hide it. It came from one of the side rooms at the end of the hall. My heart stopped. I froze where I stood. Every part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't heard it. But I had. It was real. I turned my flashlight toward the hallway and aimed it at the door where the sound came from. It was slightly ajar. Not enough to see inside, just enough to let the sound slip out. The crying continued. Not a child. Not an adult either. Just raw. Human. I took a step back, then another. I didn't run. Not yet. I just slowly backed down the hallway, never taking my eyes off that door. The sound didn't change. It didn't get closer, but it didn't stop either. When I hit the top of the stairs, I turned and walked down as fast as I could without making too much noise. My flashlight shook in my hand. I wanted to believe it was a raccoon, or wind, or even just the house settling. But it wasn't. I climbed out the same window I came in through, slammed it shut behind me, took off my gloves and stuffed them in my pocket, went straight home, locked every door, turned every light on, sat on my couch in silence for over an hour, heart still racing. I haven't gone back since. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I saw in that house. Everything left behind. The piano, the wedding photo, the food, the coat, the letter. Whoever lived there didn't just leave. They broke. Something happened, and they just cracked open and fell apart. And then they left all of it behind like it didn't matter anymore. I tried to report what I found, called the non-emergency line. They sent someone out, took a look around the outside, said there were no signs of forced entry, told me to stay out, said it was private property and the owner still paid taxes on it. I didn't argue. I knew better than to press. A few weeks later, a crew showed up, boarded up the windows, put a padlock on the back gate. Someone cares about that place, enough to keep people like me out, but not enough to come back. I still hear things sometimes. Not crying, just faint noises. A light flickering on when I'm sure it was off the day before. The curtain in the upstairs window drawn just a little bit more. A flicker of movement when I take the trash out at night. I don't talk about it with anyone. What would I say? That I broke into an abandoned house and found something that